Let's get ready to RPG!
RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG! RPG!
Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Knights of Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda, and we are here today to talk about Megadungeons. So obviously, dungeons have been on my mind a lot lately as I just kicked off the first of two Torchbearer campaigns that I'm going to be running for the Knights of Last Call patrons. And so Torchbearer is an homage to that classic dungeon experience, but sort of updated with some rules that are designed to promote some more indie style traits and character-focused arcs. So it's a very unique take. And while on the surface it does look like it's about dungeons, having been called Torchbearer and all, realistically, the dungeons in Torchbearer are not really the point in a certain way. The point is the characters. The dungeons are just the crucible, right? The dungeons are the extreme environment where we get to test our characters and see what they believe in and how are they going to grow and how are they going to change. And the dungeon is an ideal sort of experimental lab for that. And it kind of really shows our characters, or shows us who those characters are. However, as is also often the case, there was a conversation going on in the Knights of Last Call Discord about Ardenval, which is a very large dungeon that was for sale not too long ago. On sale, it's still for sale, but it's pretty expensive. And there was some conversation talking about that, and there was a lot of people who mentioned that this is a style of play that they have never really, in all their years of playing, role-playing games, have never really embraced or have never really gotten a chance to, engage with it. So again, we had folks like DM Rawlings who said, I've never done a mega dungeon. It's one of the larger gaps in my TTRPG experiences. Omniscitoad said same. I'd like to get some mega dungeon going. And then our Patreon poll was Derek's choice. So because it was Derek's choice, I figured, you know what? I've been thinking about dungeons. So let's talk specifically about the mega dungeons. And, I have a list here that I wrote down. I don't know where this stream is going to go exactly. But what I hope that I can do here is, number one, I want to talk about just, mega dungeons in general and what I think defines that and why that's a style of play that is interesting. Secondly, I want to really specifically talk about the legacy of mega dungeons and what they do and what they don't do. And I think some of the key mistakes that people make when they make a mega dungeon or they try to run a dungeon-based campaign. And then the third thing, which might be the hardest thing for us to get to, is how can we take modern games like 5th edition D&D or Pathfinder 2nd edition and modify them or change them in a way that will promote mega dungeon forward thinking. And spoiler alert, I actually think it's a lot easier to do a mega dungeon in 5th edition D&D than it is in Pathfinder 2nd edition. So that's one of my thought processes. And in fact, if I had to run a modern D20 based game and I was going to run a mega dungeon, I would almost certainly use 5th edition D&D over Pathfinder 2nd edition. And we can talk about Abomination Vaults, Sorrel, because I ran that. I ran that for my group. We skipped a level or two, but we played it from first all the way up to Belcora. And so again, I don't know if you're playing. I don't want to spoil anything, but we can talk about that as well, because I think that's a good example of Pathfinder 2nd edition and what it does well and what it maybe doesn't do as well, and what are some of the fundamental problems that Pathfinder 2nd edition has with dungeons, specifically because I think so many elements of Pathfinder 2nd edition were designed to, we'll avoid too many. We won't get too deep into it then, Sorrel, because I don't want to do too many spoilers. But a lot of the advances that Pathfinder 2, I'll put advances in quotes, but a lot of the advances that Pathfinder 2nd edition made was because, for the most part, this style of play has predominantly gone out of favor. And I think D&D 5th edition, at its core, at its root, the 2024 edition, not that different from the 2014 edition. I think the 2014 edition of D&D was actually trying to be kind of an old school dungeon based game. And I think people took it and they did the wrong things with it. So we'll probably end up busting out the whiteboard here tonight. But that's what we're going to be getting into. I just want to say hello to everybody. Hello to Omniscient Toad, who helped kick this conversation off. Thank you, Omniscient Toad. Roman is here. Thank you, Roman, for that. Am I stoked for this topic? I mean, I'll always happily talk about dungeons, the pros and the cons. Will, glad to see that you got here. Dan is on vacation in London, from Seattle. And Dan, I hope my smooth tones can take you away to Never Neverland, my friend. What's up, Pepper? Hello, Kendall. What's up, DM Rawlings, another person who was part of our conversation. Sarek, hello to you. Cephalopod, welcome. Patrick is thinking of running a Mega Dungeon. Well, great timing. What's up, Jackal? What is up? Sanderson, okay. I'll hang while you finish VTT tokens. I've been doing a lot of VTT-ifying myself lately, so I'm right there with you. Hello, Ken. I have to do Mega Dragons. Casey says my only experience with Mega Dungeons was Dungeon of the Mad Mage 5th edition during COVID when one of my players took over. It wasn't my favorite, but I also heard it's not the best example. So for starters, what's up, Junderlin? Jonas, nice to have you here. For starters, most of what most people have experienced as a Mega Dungeon is, in my personal opinion, probably not a Mega Dungeon. I don't really even consider Abomination Vaults really a Mega Dungeon. It's close in some capacity, particularly the second adventure. I mean, there are elements of it. Don't get me wrong. It is far more of a Mega Dungeon than your traditional adventure path. But there are some fundamental, issues with it. So, yeah, I guess we'll probably get to the whiteboard here. There's no use messing around with that. Let's see here. Whiteboard. Okay. There she is. Okay. Get her lined up. Whiteboard time indeed. Oh no, you're seeing behind the scenes. All right. So get our tablet out here. So I'm not really exactly sure what we're going to do here in terms of the order. So let's kind of start before we get into anything else. Let's talk a little bit about some of our core assumptions, right? So what are these, when I think of a Mega Dungeon, so this is our Mega Dungeon core assumptions. All right, move that down a little bit. Okay. There we go. Okay. Okay, so the first thing is that we assume that the majority of the campaign will take place inside this location, right? And, you know, I think this is something that you have to understand before going into this with your players, with everything else. Now, that is not to say, now, again, I don't, this is very possible to get tangented, and I don't want to get too tangented all over the place. But the long and the short of it is, and I will admit that modern D&D, one of the things we have to talk about with modern D&D and modern Pathfinder 2 is the utter lack of support for really true support for the exploration tier, and we can get into a lot of this. And again, OD&D, you know, kind of solve these issues. We just kind of have to figure out ways to bring them back. But part of the reason why so many mechanics in Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder 2 are very simple, very underdeveloped, and very quick, and don't have a lot of depth to them, is because the games were at a sort of a fundamental level, sort of based to be placed inside of a dungeon and a dungeon-based environment. The core essence of D&D, which still runs through all of these games, is really a game about, you know, exploring dangerous underground or ruined places and overcoming traps and obstacles and monsters, and right. And so a lot of our skills are not either don't exist, or they're very simplified. And they're simplified because the idea is we just want to make a check and move on, right? We want to make a check and move on. We want to make a check and we want to move on. So I think that's one of the main things that we have to understand, is that this is not going to be a campaign where your characters are going to, you know, be spending a lot of time roaming around in the wilderness, or you know, doing any of those other you know, political aspirations, or, you know, a lot of those social things that a lot of people like to do. This is a campaign about being inside of the dungeon. So that means that the focus of our campaign is going to be on dungeon delving. Okay. Now, 2. Again, this is kind of a hot take here, but so remember, I consider role-playing to be the act of playing a role-playing game. But I'm going to say, by and large, okay, and again, this is why I say not everybody should be playing in a mega dungeon, okay? But by and large, mega dungeons are for players who want to play the game of D&D, right? So what does that even mean? I don't know, you know, maybe I have a better way. You know, again, if I had time to really think this out, I would think so. But mega dungeons are about playing the game of D&D. And what do I mean by that? I mean, this is about it's about wanting to level up. It's about wanting to go into the dungeon and see cool shit and find cool treasure and overcome cool monsters and fight weird things and solve strange puzzles and, you know, deal with all of these, like, really, because D&D in its dungeon-based sort of mindset, right? It's more than just an action RPG killing everything. And it's different than you know, it's different than your Critical Role, where people are just sitting there talking in character and whatever. And again, I don't use the term role-playing because, to me, role-playing is the act of playing the game. There is this unique space of D&D where it's really just about engaging with the game and having fun with it, okay? And there's this ultimate balance, right, between the player's skill, that would be you and your fellow players, okay, and your PC's abilities. And one of the core concepts of D&D is that both of these are important. And in fact, you know, one of the rules of Dungeon Craft says that a great adventure challenges the players and the PCs, right? So we want, you know, Dungeons and Dragons is very uniquely set up to do this. And I think that if, you know, there are plenty of games where people tend to ignore the characters' stats and they really just focus on the players and what the players are saying. That's totally fine. And then there's also people who play the game where they say, look, there's a rule for everything and we're going to roll for everything. That's also fine. But I think that the core ethos of D&D, of Pathfinder 2, or of D20-based fantasy, is challenging the players and the PCs. But let's not mince words here. This is not about creating some Critical Role-esque inspired story. This is not about creating some epic tale of heroism a la Tolkien, okay, or a la the Dragonlance saga, okay, or your favorite novel, okay? This genre doesn't really exist in media. You know, the closest thing maybe is this anime that Bob and Tim have been watching on our Discord, Delicious in Dungeon Meshi. But even that, right, in my opinion, has, you know, this sort of more of these spinning wheels. Now, that's not to say that Megadungeons, again, the other assumption is to assume that you're just walking through, you know, rooms and just killing monsters, and then there's no rhyme or reason to anything. That's also a flawed assumption. But this genre doesn't really exist as a novel or as a movie. It is a unique experience. And what it really is that dungeons, and a large dungeon in particular, provides a unique vehicle that allows your players to really experience the game. They get to level up. They get to fight monsters. They get to overcome traps. They get to explore cool locations. They get to solve puzzles. They get to think laterally, outside the box. You know, they get cool magical treasures, right? So the core element of D&D and Pathfinder 2 is based in this progression. So while, you know, we use the term here, you know, we talk about on our Discord about this game that people call Path Builder Extreme, right? And this is just for people who, quote, want to make a build, and then they just play a series of combats. Now, I'm not saying it's that, but I'm also saying that, you know, there's an element there of just like, look, I want to play this character as an excuse to go into this dungeon and level up, right? So Path Builder Extreme is, I think, a little bit more towards the just here's a bunch of straight combats, which a lot of people make a mistake. But I also think it's a mistake to assume that your dungeon needs to include all sorts of role-playing encounters and, you know, whatever that again, I think they're all role-playing encounters. But, you know, like all of these different things. And I don't think that that's necessarily true, right? I think that it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And it's about engaging with the game's core mechanics. Okay. So again, these are my core assumptions. All right. 3. Alt W1. What is it? There we go. There. All right. 3. Things get more dangerous. Oh my goodness. What is going on? Oh, okay. I see what's going on here. I see what's going on here. When I made this window, it was not full screen. Okay. There we go. Much better. Okay. So things get more dangerous as you go deeper. Now, this has always been part of D&D, but this has never been more easy to do in our modern era of challenge ratings or level-based monsters. And it's really quite simple, okay? You're going to have, right, the surface, you know, maybe here's the town, right? You know, here's the town, the buildings. And then some far distance away, okay? You know, here's some ancient, you know, ruins of some maybe powerful keep or something like that. And of course, below it is dungeons, right? And we've got, for all intents and purposes, level 1, okay, of the dungeon. And then there might be, you know, of course, there's level 2 and down to level 10 or, you know, whatever have you. And the general assumption is that and again, it maybe doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but this is the game of Dungeons and Dragons, is we assume that the creatures on level 1, okay, are level 1 creatures, okay? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all level 1 creatures, okay? We might have maybe, I'm kind of getting ahead here, but, there's this cool idea of sort of, previewing, future monsters or something like that. And, maybe there's a level 3 monster on level 1, and that's like one of the bosses, of level 1. It's one of the big monsters, okay? But the idea is that it's appropriate for a level 1 party. If you want level 1 challenges, okay, then you go to level 1. Conversely, if your party was a level 1 party, or let's just say you've leveled up, you're now a level 2 party, and on level 1, you found a secret staircase or some sort of secret tunnel or shaft, right, that leads down to all the way down to level 5. Well, then your level 2 party could go to level 5, but the challenges there would be level 5 challenges, and the treasures and the rewards, the experience, the treasure, the gold, the magic items would be level 5. So there's this inherent idea here, okay, that risk equals reward. And one of the most important things that you need to do as a mega dungeon, or that a good mega dungeon does, is give players choices and options about how to engage with that risk and that reward. Okay. So, maybe on level 1, there's a secret staircase that goes down to 5, and then we have a connection to level 2. But then level 2 connects to level 3 and level 4. Okay. I'm just drawing these just to make them fit. So when you're down on level 2, if the group says, "Hey, we're good players. We're feeling like, biting off more than we can chew, or we're feeling like taking on some extra risk," they can do that by just going to a deeper level. And in fact, in that way, finding a deeper level becomes a reward in and of itself, because the treasures are going to be better and the blah, 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 right? So there's this idea here that as we get further down, things, right, become, more deadly. But additionally, there's a couple of things that trigger off of this, okay? So things get more dangerous as you go deeper, okay? But also, as you go deeper, okay, things get stranger. All right? If you read D&D and Pathfinder 2, it's a weird game. It was born out of this sort of weird Jack Vance, kind of a mindset of strange and unusual things. If we go back to the first edition AD&D, you had adventures like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks that featured a crashed flying saucer. Now, I'm not saying you need to go complete and total weirdo gonzo, but what I'm saying is that there should be a transition in your game, just like your players, right? Your players start with PCs, okay, at level 1, and they look like they're straight out of the Lord of the Rings, right? At low level, your characters, your ranger looks like Aragorn, your warrior, your fighter looks like Boromir. They've got, leather armor, chainmail, a shield, boots, right? They look like they could be pulled out of Tolkien. You cut to 3 or 4 or 5 levels later, and this isn't just a modern D&D phenomenon, okay? This is going back to first edition AD&D. And suddenly they have boots that let them fly, and, they're projecting magical webs, and they have, ropes that they can, command with their mind and have them climb walls and tie themselves off to stuff, right? You have all these weird magical items. The PCs themselves are very strange and unusual, right? Like imagine back to Lord of the Rings, and Aragorn is charging into combat, And then before he does, Gandalf, waves his hands around, and suddenly Aragorn, doubles in size as he gets hit with an enlarged spell, and Legolas gets hit with a haste spell, and he's suddenly somehow even attacking even further. And you're just like, this is a different type of game. This is a very different type of genre. And so similarly, while the first opening levels of your dungeon, okay, maybe levels 1 and 2 and 3, can be, can look like the basement of some sort of European medieval keep, and maybe some caves or some caverns. When you start to get down into level 4 and level 5, and, when you start getting down even further into level, 10 and, and beyond, then the game itself should get weirder. I mean, look at the creatures that they're going to be fighting. At the beginning of the game, you're fighting basically, 2 arms, 2 legs, humans for the most part, maybe some big bugs. But by the time you're like level 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, you're fighting, floating eyeball beholders and extra dimensional, Cthulhian horrors and in mind flayers and, packs of Medusas. The game gets weird. The game gets strange, right? The game, not only does it get stranger, okay, the game also gets, as you go deeper, it gets more magical, right? Things become increasingly fantastic. And this is what ratchets up the fun of the game experience, because the PCs are getting weirder and stranger and more powerful and more magical, but so are the environments and so are the monsters. If you keep your dungeon looking like a bunch of stone walls and stone floors and everything looks like pseudo weird Gothic architecture, and you do that for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels, yeah, people are going to get bored. You need to throw these escalation of curveballs, right? And just going down. So it's important to understand that, as we go down, it's important that we kind of escalate, right? So the magic gets stronger, the things get stranger, and the risks get better. And it goes without saying here, but right, treasure, okay, is based on dungeon level, not the PC's level. So I don't care what level you are. If you make it down to level 3, you are going to find powerful treasures. You are going to find cool loot. You are going to find lots of gold. You're going to find a lot of really good treasure, because the treasure is not tied to your level. It's tied to the dungeon level. 6, 7. There is no meta plot. And we'll get into this, but while you should have this idea of dungeon factions, okay? And you would be remiss if you didn't put some sort of, I don't know, giant dragon or demon or something like that. Giant dragon at the bottom of your dungeon or something like that. The key thing here is the players aren't doing this because they have to. They're not doing this because they're forced to do this. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have people in town who give them quests or hooks to go do something, right? A wizard arrives in town and says, legends tell of a mystical ruby located somewhere on the 5th level that, enhances powers of seeing and blah, blah, blah. As an oracle, I want to be able to obtain this gem. I will pay you handsomely, or I will reward you with this magical item, or whatever. You can give players, or they could find rumors in town, or they could find bits of information scattered in the dungeon. But, and that can give the players direction. That can give the players focus. Focus is very important. We're talking about the assumptions of a mega dungeon here, but one of the key mistakes to make with any dungeon, let alone a mega dungeon, is just to go, okay, you're at the dungeon, there's a hallway, it goes left and right, where do you go? Because it's literally there's no context for why the players are even exploring this place. You want to give them some sort of, it's a space that they're trying to explore. And sometimes it's fun just to explore just for exploration's sake. But it can also be very useful for the players to have externally driven goals. And again, it's not like do this or the town will get destroyed. If you don't do this, the town will get destroyed. No, this is an opportunity. It's not a requirement. And the moment you start trying to, control the pacing and control the pushing, that can be fine. That's a great tool. It's one of the reasons I love playing Powered by the Apocalypse games. But that's a very different type of experience. And if you want to have that kind of GM, controlling the gas and the brake, this is not the style of play for you. The dungeon is the Megadungeon is the ultimate sandbox experience. And it's the perfect hybrid, okay? Because it gives the players almost complete autonomy, almost complete player agency. But it also isn't just, hey, you can go anywhere and you can do anything, right? There's an understanding both between the players and the GM and between the player characters and the world that you can't go to a dungeon room that doesn't exist. If I sit down and I take a sheet of graph paper and I map out a dungeon and I put, 20 or more rooms into that level, the players may never explore even half of those rooms. But potentially that might take me, maybe a week or two, depending on how, comfortable I am with doing that and how comfortable I am. But I could get potentially multiple weeks of play out of that. And maybe they don't ever explore it. Maybe they come back to it at some point in the later time. But part of the idea here is that they are doing it they have complete freedom to go anywhere in the dungeon as long as it exists. So they can't go somewhere that I haven't prepared for because they can only go to a room that I added to the dungeon. So there's no structural meta plot here. And Knox says Tome of Annihilation's biggest fault is having a meta plot, in my opinion. And Knox, you're absolutely correct. Because, and this is true of most modern adventures, and I'm going to call out one that I'm more familiar with because I haven't played the 5e games, which is Pathfinder 2's Abomination Vaults, okay? And I don't think I'm giving, too much away here. But, the idea of Pathfinder 2 Abomination Vaults is it is a 10-level dungeon, okay? And you're going down through it, okay? Because at the bottom, there is a nasty, evil spirit named Belcora who wants to destroy the town and destroy whatever. So the players, there's this idea of time pressure, right? There's this idea of you're on the clock. There's this idea of people are counting on you and you have to do stuff, which is fine, okay? This is also going to be a knock kind of separately, but against Quest for the Frozen Flame, which is another Paizo adventure that I've played. Quest for the Frozen Flame is ostensibly, advertised as a hex crawl, but the hex crawl and the Megadungeon both have a fundamental flaw if you are including something like, hey, there's an evil spirit who wants to destroy all the towns and blow up the main city, or Quest for the Frozen Flame, which says, hey, you're on this hex crawl, but you're leading your tribe across the valley while a horde of murderous psychopaths, a literal army of murderous psychopaths is chasing you down to destroy you utterly. These two things, this meta plot, this time pressure, do something that is really, really just dagger in the heart to a Megadungeon, which is that it kills this idea of curiosity-based exploration. If, it doesn't make any sense for your character to be poking around and trying things out and seeing where this leads and seeing where this goes, or, hey, look at this cool cave that we found. We should go check it out as PCs. No, we shouldn't. The world is going to end. Our people are going to get destroyed. The towns are going to get destroyed. The whole point of the Megadungeon is that the players have the freedom to explore. And I know a lot of people talk about the limitations or the lacking limitations of the mechanics of the quote unquote exploration pillar in modern D20 games. And there's something to be said there about there's some fundamental problems with exploration mechanically. I would say that there's less of a problem mechanically and there's more of a problem procedurally, which we can talk about. But for me, it's much more of a deeper issue than that. The issue isn't the mechanics. The issue is that most people are playing in adventures where the idea of your character just wandering around and exploring stuff just to see what's happening doesn't make any sort of sense because they're on the clock, because people are counting on them. All right. If you play Rise of the Rune Lords, or if you watched our actual play, I mean, the PCs are rushing to save Sandpoint, and then there's a murderer on the loose, and then they have to pursue him all the way to, Magnamar, and then they have to follow where the conspiracy leads, and then there's a town that's going to get destroyed by a flood, and then they have to stop the giant army. You know what I mean? And then there's a dragon, and then and now a god is going to be an evil god is going to be reborn. That is not a place that is encouraging people to go, hey, poke around, take your time, see what there is to be seen. Think about the difference between, you're going into a museum as a person, right? You're going into a museum and you have to find, your wife in the next 15 minutes so that you can make your flight to get home. Okay. That's a very different experience in that museum than, hey, you've got a Saturday to kill. Your wife doesn't even fly in till tomorrow. You've got all day to just poke around this museum, to look at the art, to see hey, look at this strange section. Oh, there's stairs going down. I wonder if there's some sort of basement to this, to this museum. I want to check out what's down there. I don't know. Is this off limits? There's no sign that says I'm not off limits. I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to wander around the gift store and take a look at stuff and flip through a book that I find in there. It's a very different experience than you have to find your wife in the next 15 minutes or 30 minutes or you will miss your flight, right? That's not you exploring. That's you looking. And it's a very different feel. It's a very different process. It's a very different procedure. Now, obviously, dungeons are dangerous. But one of the cool advantages that modern D&D has over old school D&D, I'm talking about your OSR, your old school essentials or whatever. And this is actually, I think, a cool thing, okay? Which is that modern D&D characters are kind of tough. And it's not necessarily like, fantasy fucking Vietnam. And, I think part of the problem with some of these old school games is they also punish exploration by being overly harsh with the mechanics, by being overly harsh with just, you die. And that does something else. That is going to disincentivize people from poking around. It's going to disincentivize people from biting off more than they can chew. Now, there's a certain play style or play mindset that enjoys that type of game, and I'm not saying that they're wrong either. I think that's a totally different style of game. What I am saying is that there is a place for the sort of 3E, 4E, 5E, D&D, Pathfinder 2, Pathfinder 1 style of game, a more modern D20 game that can take place in these dungeon environments and can be more fun because the players are stronger, right? And it can start to feel like some of those really awesome, if you've ever played, like MMOs growing up, then, that's pretty awesome. This ability to just wander around and explore stuff. Now, Sorrel says D&D at high levels equals can't die. That's fine. You could never die in D&D because in old school D&D, raise dead existed. Now, sure, it maybe wasn't as utterly hand-wavy convenient as it is in modern D&D, but once you reached a certain level in D&D, you had access to raise dead. You had access to resurrection magic. Dying and coming back was always a part of the game. Now, this may sound strange because, part of the reason, and I agree with some people who say, if you die and you come back, it eliminates the tension. That's assuming that the fun of the game is that you have one life to live. But I posit this question, which is that people really enjoy playing MMOs. And they have for the last 25 years. And in MMOs, you can explore, you can wander around, you can get together with your group of party members, and sometimes you die and you wipe out, and then you respawn back at, wherever your bind point or the spirit healer or whatever, and maybe there's a little bit of a ding or a little bit of a price to pay, but then you're back into the game. If playing an MMO resulted, like the hardcore mode, where if your character dies, your character gets deleted, then that's going to be a very different experience that I don't actually think D&D is good at delivering. So to a certain extent, I'm okay with characters not being able to die. Okay. Furthermore, all right, I want to address what Chadram just said. I like Raise Dead costing a lot of money. Forces the party to really choose between bringing back the PC or buying some cool new stuff. There's a lot of loaded context to that, and it really depends on what kind of game you're playing, and it also really depends on, what it is that you're trying to do. Mark Rosewater says, the fun thing, the interesting thing should be the fun thing. If I personally don't think Raise Dead should cost that much money, if I'm being completely honest with you. Now, granted, I do think that there's a whole style, a whole systematic thing there of talking about the value of money in the D&D game. But I don't think that the players should ever have to choose. Like, they should, of course, bring back the PC. That's the PC. They should never have to choose between, well, this character, we're all going to suck, right? Like, if you look at the cost of like a Raised Dead and Pathfinder 2, it's like you might have to end up selling your magical items. And because of the way that the balance system works in that game, selling your magical items could actually completely, fuck you over, and actually make you unable to play the game. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a price for dying. That's fine. But I am saying that I think if you make it too expensive, you're gonna hurt that motivation. I think you really should look at like the cost of dying in MMOs, and I think you should look at the cost of dying and things of that. Also, I think people tend to forget, like, if it takes a bit of time, it can sting. Your character. No one likes to lose anyways. And so just dying alone is almost already kind of a cost. EQ2 was a second job. Sweet. As a high-end. So I didn't play EQ2 that much. I started off a little bit. I was a swashbuckler. I was actually I was more of a furniture maker, actually. I was a carpenter, a trade skill class. This was like the original EQ2. I think they changed it originally, but like I was on launch on my games. Ludoite. Hardcore WoW is pretty popular right now, but I think mostly for people to watch streamers die. Absolutely, Ludoite. I mean, there's always going to be people who want to play a hardcore mode of an RPG. That's totally fine, but my guess is these are people who've been playing WoW for 20 years and they need or want that sort of extreme challenge, which is totally acceptable and totally fine. Like a lot of people talk about Souls-like games, right? And I want to make my RPG Souls-like. Now, I don't know a lot about the Souls-like games because I haven't played them, but I'm willing to bet that when your character dies in a Souls-like game, it doesn't delete your save and start you over at the very beginning of the game. I'm just guessing. I could be wrong, but I'm willing to bet it's not like, and people go, oh, it's like a roguelike. Yeah, but my thing about roguelike is the whole point of a roguelike is to die. And I don't know my roguelikes completely, but my understanding with a lot of roguelikes, especially modern roguelikes, is like when you die, you start over again, but like you keep some of your skills or you keep some of your magical items, right? So there's this idea that you're progressing through death, right? So all of these games handle death better, right? Even dying can be progressing, right? Because when you play a Souls-like game, sure, you died, but you learned a little bit about that enemy's, pattern. So you reload your game, you fight your way through the monsters, the trash, and then you encounter the monster again, boom, boom, boom. Okay, maybe it kills you again, but now you definitely know its pattern. You just need to work on your timing. You do it a third time, you beat it. That feels very accomplished, right? Same thing with a roguelike game. You go through, you get this far, it kills you, you reload, but you're like, oh, cool, but I have this extra little bit of progression, and now I can make it a little bit further, and I can make it a little bit further. And there's a fun game of how far can I make it with the progression I have, but dying feels in some ways like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. It has never felt like that way in D&D, and I think that is to the failing of the game in many ways. I am familiar with almost no video games, General Lynn, so I've heard of these games, at least I've heard of Slay the Spire, but I have not heard of them, So Derek Rawlings says what shouldn't be a hot take, but somehow is a hot take. If you don't want to have characters die arbitrarily, then don't play a game where arbitrary character death is possible. And at the core of it, we are getting off on a tangent, as we're loath to do. This is what causes people to fudge. You're playing a game that is designed around, oops, my character died, I got to get a raise. That's the game you're playing. And the mechanics understand that, and the mechanics support that type of game. But what people want out of a game has changed so significantly, but the mechanics and the underlying DNA of the game hasn't. And so they're still playing a game where, arbitrary character death can occur, but they don't want arbitrary character death to occur, even though there are games out there that completely dismiss with the idea of arbitrary character death, completely. Okay. So let me get back to my list before we get too distracted. So treasure is based off a dungeon level, not PC's level. There is no meta plot. We're kind of off on my list here a little bit. But the core idea here is that players manage risk and reward, right? And if they want a harder experience, they go down. If they want an easier experience, they go up. All right. 8. These are my assumptions. Okay. 8, which is there's a balance between realism and fun. Look, in other words, I'm not really worried about Gygaxian naturalism. Okay. And if you don't know what that is, that's okay. But, I'm not really concerned about Gygaxian naturalism. Gygaxian naturalism is this idea that even like Gary Gygax, I don't think really espoused. It was just kind of associated with him, which is this like, what do the monsters eat? How is there sufficient airflow through these dungeons? I think your primary goal with a dungeon should be to make something that is fun without being like completely bonkers and off the chart. So in other words, do we have to worry about like what every monster's food source is? No. But, should we have a, 100-foot long dragon inside of a room that it couldn't possibly get into? Probably not. I think that, if I have to choose between realism and fun, I'm going to choose fun, especially as you get further in level and the monsters get weirder and stranger, and, all these things other words. So, again, it has to avoid glaringly obvious suspensions of disbelief, but we're not here to, simulate some sort of actual underground environment. This is a dungeon. This is weird. It's strange. It's magical. And we don't have to really worry about that. And part of it is, as we get further and deeper, we should lean into that and embrace that more and more and more and more. Okay. 9. All right. Okay. The dungeon is huge. All right. This gets to what I consider to be sort of the crux of what is the difference between a mega dungeon and a regular dungeon. In that a mega dungeon, a regular dungeon might have 5, 10, 20 rooms on a level. And I remember I showed a map a long time ago of like a mega dungeon to some of the people from Patreon. And someone was like, that is absolutely massive. I go, I don't even consider that a mega dungeon. If a dungeon could basically be completely explored by the PCs, if they could, 100% clear it, it's not a mega dungeon. It's really not. And mega dungeons are vast. They're designed to take characters over a wide range of rooms, and they will not clear it all. Right? Or if they did, it's going to be like pointless past a certain point, right? Because I'm not structuring, okay? I'm not structuring the game around the player's level, okay? So what do I mean by that? Okay, let's say the players are level 1, and this represents the dungeon, right, of level 1, okay? And then here's level 2 of the dungeon, and here's level 3 of the dungeon, okay? So the party starts off, and they're on level 1, right? And they're doing level 1. They're completing it. They're completing it. They're completing it. They're completing it. And, they get through about halfway. And at this point, the party levels to level 2. But they're like, no, we want to keep playing. We want to keep playing. So they keep playing on level 1. But now they're earning less experience because the monsters didn't get magically tougher. In fact, if anything, these encounters are pretty easy. And they're playing and they're playing, and it's taking forever. It's taking forever. They're still not level 3. And finally, level 1 is completely cleared out. So then they start on level 2. And they go to here. And now they're level 3. And now they're getting less experience. And so now it's going to take even longer to level up. So they're trying to clear level 2, level 2, level 2, level 2. They're clearing, they're clearing, they're clearing. Now they're level 4. At this point, the game is a joke. They're just, mechanically, they are just going to stomp everything. And the amount of experience they get now, the monsters aren't magically level 4. The monsters aren't magically level 3. The monsters are level 2. This is very easy for the PCs. And this is kind of like where you have to stick to your guns, because as players, as GMs, it's natural for us to think back to our dungeon world principles, right? Our job is to challenge the PCs and make sure every fight is a nail biter. No, you have to avoid that mechanic. You aren't here to put the pressure on them. They're there to put the pressure on themselves. Okay? So while the party may be obsessed with clearing out every level by level, if on level 2, and by the way, they've just gotten to level 4 and it is going painfully slow. And then suddenly on level 2, they find a secret stairway that leads down to level 4. And they go, man, I don't want to do another 3 or 4 or 5 sessions of us just trying to clear this level because it's so painfully slow. You know what? It's been so easy the last couple of weeks. Let's go down to level 4. Let's actually go fight stuff that's, our level and have a challenge for a sense. And then they go into the stairway. Maybe there's actually a secret stairway off of that stairway that leads down to level 5. And the party goes, you know what? Let's do it. Let's change it up. So they go down to level 5 and they completely skip levels 3 and 4. And then they suddenly start to get it. Because if a party were to play it like this, where they wanted to clear every single level, too many GMs will start to react, and they will start to give them better treasure and give them tougher monsters because they think that that's their goal and their job. And they won't. If the players don't have to go down to level 5 to get level 5 treasure and to get level 5 challenges, they won't. Right? They're lazy. Players are going to take the path of least resistance. So that is where it's really important to understand that you're not gonna kill everything. And if you do want to just clear the complete dungeon, it's going to take you a long time. It's almost going to be, dare I say it, kind of boring. But the difference is that when a game becomes boring, too many people are associating this with the play patterns of an adventure path. Because in an adventure path, if you have to go from this encounter to this encounter to this encounter, you have to go to this encounter, you have to go to this encounter, you have to go to this encounter. And if by the time you get to this, second or third encounter, you're like, come on, man, this is just too easy. Well, now, the players don't have a choice. They have to go through your boring ass adventure. They don't get a choice in that matter. They have to go through it. You didn't make the challenges tough enough and they thought these things were going to be challenged. If you have a group of players who want to be challenged, then they are going to skip ahead as often as they can. Okay? And that kind of brings me to my next point, which is, the campaign should have a player-driven end. Now, it is true that back in the day, Megadungeons could potentially be played for years and years and years and years. That's probably not likely these days. But what you could do, you don't even necessarily have to start the campaign with this, right? The players go here and they've just heard rumors of this ancient, abandoned, city with, all these different levels and the vast treasures of the ancients. But, once they've gotten in there and they've started to learn things about the dungeon, they learn that on level 20, there's a gigantic dragon or there's some sort of big, bad monster, evil final boss. And you basically set the tone. You say, for all intents and purposes, when you kill that monster, the campaign is over. You guys could quit the campaign before we ever get to that point. That's true. But I'll tell you this, if you guys play really well and you're playing really aggressively and you skip down to level 5 and you level up to level 6 or 7, and then you skip down to level 8, and then just in a few sessions, you're already level 10, and then you go from 10 to 13 and from 13 to 15 to 16 jumping ahead to 18, and then you say, you know what, we're kind of sweet, we're kind of powerful, we're broken. Let's try taking on the dragon, even though we're only level 18. When the dragon dies, the campaign's over. And the players know that. So they control the pacing of the game. How strong do we think we need to beat? You know, they may not care about killing the dragon. That's totally respectable. But like for some players, it'll just be like, hey, I want to level up and get stronger so that we can fight the dragon at the bottom of the dungeon. I mean, not to mention we have to actually get down there and find it and do all that other stuff. But, you know, it's not some open-ended campaign that you can just play and play and play and play forever. I like giving the players definite stopping points of victory, you know, and maybe before the dragon, the big bad dragon on level 10, you know, maybe there's the demon lord on level 10. And so maybe your campaign doesn't get to level 20, but maybe your players play through the first 10 levels of your game and they fight the demon lord. Now you're like, oh, what's the demon lord's evil? No, nothing really, not really. I mean, I'm not saying that they're literally standing around there doing nothing, and I think it's fine to include faction-based play. But the moment you start putting down, you know, oh, you players, you gotta kill the demon lord before he rises and destroys the town and kills everybody, it ruins the whole fun of this game, or what it should be. And that's not to say, you know, and that's kind of an 11th point, which is, you know, the dungeon is dynamic. And that's to say that, you know, the players are going to do stuff, and that's going to change stuff. And that's great. Hey, we got a lot of chats. GM Scott.
GM Scott tipped $25. You always do the good streams on Tuesdays. I love this topic. Too bad I can't stay to
Thank you,
participate.
GM Scott. Thank you,
I
GM
have to
Scott.
run my VSD
I hope you enjoy the VOD.
I'll have to catch
I'm
the
sorry
VOD.
that I always do the good streams on Tuesdays, but thank you so much. Yeah, GM Scott, I hope you get to experience some of this in our Torchbearer campaign. Thank you very much, GM Scott. That is very generous of you, and I appreciate you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, GM Scott. So enjoy your game. But yeah, so the dungeon is dynamic, okay, and that means that, you know, just like the players should be changing the dungeon. Okay. And here's the thing. You don't have a meta plot. You don't care. Once you set it up, you have no expectation over what is supposed to happen. Okay. If the players come up with some crazy scheme and they, I don't know, unleash the dam and they open an extra dimensional portal to the plane of water and it completely floods level 3 or 4 of the dungeon. Okay. But they ruined, what did they ruin? They ruined nothing, because there's nothing to ruin. The whole point of your dungeon isn't to service some story. The whole purpose of your dungeon is to be a playground where your players can go do what I like to call D&D shit, okay? Or D&D shenanigans. It's not Lord of the Rings. It's not Critical Role. It's not any sort of movie. It's just the weird, dumb D&D shit that people do. And I'm telling you, it could be a lot of fun. And the game is very good at supporting it. The game is filled with weird spells and strange magical items that just lead to weird, crazy solutions to things. So, you know, we talk on this channel a lot about combat as sport and combat as war. Well, the way to think of a dungeon, a mega dungeon, is, you know, exploration as war, right? It's this idea that you are going to be engaging with the environment, and the environment should and will and must change, which, you know, I think is one of the coolest things as a player, is when you can see that your actions have had a legitimate change on the environment, which is pretty great. All right. Let's see here. 12. The many entrances slash no one true way. You definitely want to, as they say, jaquaise the dungeon, right? And you want to make it so that there isn't just one linear path through the mega dungeon. There should be no right way or wrong way. There should just be different ways to go through it. And part of doing this is giving the players numerous ways of accessing your dungeon to make secrets, right, to make discovery and knowledge feel rewarding is the name of the game. And we'll kind of talk maybe more about this. So in a mega dungeon, don't think about fronts. No, Junderland, I think you should absolutely think about fronts, but I think you should think about them in the context of the dungeon. Okay. So what do I mean by the dungeon? I mean, like, maybe the bugbears are trying to take over the rest of level 2. See, this isn't like something like, if we don't stop the bugbears, they're going to take over the town. Well, now we feel like we have to go take on the bugbears, right? If we're any heroes of any, any sort of real stature. No, we could just say, yeah, I don't know. Hell, we want to help the bugbears. They want to take out the gnolls. We hate the gnolls. Fuck the gnolls. The bugbears never did anything wrong to us. So let's help them out. Okay. So I think fronts are a great way of interacting with the factions and the faction-based play. And so these are my core assumptions about it. 13. Each level should be distinct and themed. One of the fun parts of a dungeon is getting to use ideas or getting to use strange concepts that just don't really fit anywhere else. And when you start to embrace it, this kind of is tied to this idea of like every level shouldn't just be, okay, it's a 10-foot wide corridor with cobblestone roads, cobblestone floors and loose masonry walls with arches that disappear above your head about 10 feet above you. And it just goes in, oak doors bound together. No, like that'll just all start to blend together. Now, I'm not saying you need to like literally make up just like some random thing like clown vomit. But what I think you can do is you can give each level a distinct character, unique monsters that can really, really give the dungeon, that level, a unique character that if you were to take your character, if you were to take your PCs and place them onto that level and just describe to the players, this is what they see. They go, oh, we're on level 2. Oh, we're on level 4. Oh, we're on level 6 France. I mean, sure. Why not? But obviously that's a little bit of a tongue in cheek, but you're not far off from the idea of it, which is that, you want players to be able to identify this and make, certain assumptions and certain ideas about how that level might work. Okay. So, let's see here. So we'll go over these again. So the majority of the campaign, these are the core assumptions, right? Majority of the campaign will take place inside the mega dungeon. By and large, mega dungeons are for playing people who actually want to play the game of D&D. That means challenging the players and the PCs. That things get more dangerous as you go deeper. That there's a risk versus reward idea. That things get stranger, that more magical. The treasure is better as you go deeper. Treasure is based off of dungeon level, not PC's level. 7, there is no meta plot. 8, a balance between realism and fun. We don't really care too much about like what everything is eating and how does airflow circulations work down here. The dungeon is huge. You will not be able to just easily clear every level and get through every encounter. The campaign should have a player-driven end. I'm a big fan of a big dragon at the bottom. The dungeon is dynamic. The PCs can and should change the dungeon. There should be many entrances, many different paths. There's no one true way to go through the dungeon. If you know anything about like jaquazing the dungeon, this is that same idea. And each level should be distinct and themed. So, Derek says, I once had a district that was cursed so that healing magic was halved and my players avoided it for months. I love that idea. Now you call them districts on a maps. I like to call them regions. But the idea of, there's that undead level, okay, where, light doesn't get brighter than dim light, and all healing magic is halved or doesn't work. That is automatically, and it's the level that has all like the shadows and wraiths and other incorporeal undead, along with those like strange, that's a great level. That's cool. That's awesome, and you make it so that it's like, wow, this feels unique and this feels distinct. And the other thing too, which is great, is D&D and Pathfinder, they give us tools for balancing, but they're not perfect and they're not always the best. Okay. And part of the problem is when you have an adventure path that looks like this, okay, where you are forcing the players, they're level 2, and they go from this encounter to this encounter, and then they go from this encounter to this encounter, and then they go from this encounter to this encounter. The players have no choice. Okay. They are passengers on this ride. And I don't think that it is unfair to assume as a player that if you are at least going on this forced railroad, that the challenges that are going to be put before you are balanced, appropriate, whatever. And that puts a lot of pressure on the GM, puts a lot of pressure on adventure designers, it puts a lot of pressure on game systems to really lock that shit down. Because you want to be able to guarantee that, you're not putting the players into a place where they basically feel like, fuck this is too hard, that's not fair. And we didn't have a choice. We had to go to the haunted house because that's where the adventure goes, and that's where the murderer is, and that's what we're doing. So these encounters have to be CR appropriate balanced. And what does that mean? And how do we adjust for that? Blah, 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 blah. Brings up all the modern issues that we have. But see, in a dungeon, a mega dungeon, there is no meta plot. The players choose the direction and the nature of their challenges. If the players go down to the aforementioned undead level, okay, now maybe in theory, let's say our undead dark level, okay, is level 5. And the players go down there, let's say, let's say they're level 5. And they go into, so these are our PCs, and they go into our dark, undead, dim light, healing doesn't work level. And they, after like 1 or 2, fights, they're like, man, this is bullshit, Derek. This is bullshit, Derek. If they were on an adventure path where they had to go through level 5, where there was no other option to go through level 5, maybe they're right. Maybe I fucking messed it up. Maybe I screwed it up. Maybe the balance on level 5 isn't perfect. That's okay. Because you know what? They still have all of level 4 to go through. Hell, they found a secret passage that just takes you past level 5 and takes you to level 6, which is arguably tougher, but maybe it will be easier because it's different or has different challenges that their party is better suited for. So they go, you know what, let's go back to level 4 and let's keep doing some more of that. And then they level up to 6 and they get some better magical items. And then they go back to 5. And then they say, okay, well, this isn't so hard now. We have different equipment, or we have different spells, or we're just a little bit stronger. Or maybe when they get to level 6 on level 5, they just cut straight to level 6. And they say, you know what? Fuck level 5. Derek's such a dick, And then, of course, naturally, what you do is you on level 6, right? Is you make them find some sort of rumor, or you make them find some sort of ancient writing, or about a really cool magical item or something that lays on level 5, right? You want to entice them. Hey, they're like, that sounds awesome. You're like, where is it said to 5? It is said to lie in the place, the layer of shadows where no light can shine, and where the soul's energy is diminished by. And they're like, fuck. He's talking about level 5, and you're like, yes, I am. Yes, I am. And so now the party starts going, okay, all right. How do we get to level 5? And you know what their way to get to level 5 might be? Let's go level 6 until we get to level 7, and then we'll hit up level 7 until we get to level 8. And then when we're level 8, way over leveled, let's go back to level 5 and let's ruffle stomp it. And let me tell you about something. There are a few things in RPGs that are more satisfying than going to some level and having the DM being like, "Wahahaha, it's so challenging," and then you're like, okay, you win that round, and then you go and level up, because this is part of the fundamental power fantasy of D&D. Okay, that you never get to experience anymore in these modern games, because you level up, and so does the monster, and everything is always your level or tougher, and you never get to feel more powerful or cool, and it feels pointless and it feels useless to go back to some previous level, because number one, that's just not the way the adventure paths work, and number two, what am I getting out of it, right? But when you over level a dungeon, and then you go back to this level that you skipped or that it was tough before, and then you are just laughing in its face that you're just crushing it. Now, granted, would somebody want to do that for 4 or 5 sessions in a row? Probably not. They would probably get bored, and eventually they'd be like, look, that, and maybe they won't. That's up to them. But would they want to do that for a session? Maybe 2? Yeah, I think so. Now, Dr. Waite says, in 5e, you're always more powerful than the enemies. So if I took a CR 9 monster against a level 1 party in 5e, the party would be stronger than the CR 9. I don't know 5e. I mean, maybe the answer is they would be. I'm just curious if that's a truism, or what's the scale there. Let's see here. Exploration at war is just guerrilla warfare to a certain extent. Yes, that's true. Now, Jason asked a question. How do you maintain the expectation for that loot at that point, though? Wouldn't that cool loot start to feel less interesting if they're much higher level? How do you handle expectations? Jason, you're absolutely right. And there is times where people go, you know what? That thing that we were going to go get, I don't really care about it anymore. So we found, other stuff to do. Sometimes people like to go back, Jason, just for the personal satisfaction. And I don't think you should write that off. The personal satisfaction of going, yeah, I don't know how many of you have ever played, like a video game or an MMO. And, I know I've done this in MMO where there was like a dungeon that I tried to do when I was level 20 or level 30, and it just crushed me. And I just said, screw it. My character went somewhere else, and I leveled up to level 50 or 60. And then it just because you're feeling bored, you're not going to get any experience. All the monsters are gray. None of the loot is going to be something that you want, but sometimes you just want to take your level 60 character and go back to that dungeon that you used to wipe in all the time when you're level 30 and just go and just nuke everything down, right? And just burn everything to the ground. That's pretty cool. So I don't think you should sell that short. That being said, Jason, also too, the thing about magical items are, it depends on what the expectation there is. If we're talking about numerical bonuses, like in a game like Pathfinder 2, then that can certainly be the case, and that can certainly be problematic. On the other hand, if it's a unique item that does something that maybe you created as a GM, or more importantly, maybe you can't just go buy any magical items that you want in the game. So for all your knowledge, that's the only, that's the only Cloak of Shadows in the game is on level 5. And if you want that Cloak of Shadows, then you're going to need to go and get it. Because you can't just go buy it, and you can't just go do it. Now, this gets to, I guess it's not an assumption, but it's more of a play pattern thing. Part of the key for a mega dungeon is you can't let your players just buy magical items. I've pretty much convinced of this at this point, but same thing here. All right, so people are filling me up on 5e. They say, nah, once you hit like level 5, it goes to shit. Okay. Dr. Waite says after you get out of levels 1 to 5, I had a 7th level character's trounce a Merilith. My 7th level player party killed the goddess of winter. Jackal says, I am the god of the estate of unrest. That is amazing. Unrest is a fantastic dungeon from EverQuest 1. Yeah, so again, I don't know that much about 5e as much as you all do. I've played it ironically 1 through 20, but it was very heavily house ruled, and then we played it like 1 to 5. It seemed like it was fine. And my players were not car op in any stretch of the imagination. Maybe 5e D&D only goes to level 10. Maybe it just doesn't work past a certain point at that point, or something like that. So, and that's probably, okay, to a certain extent. One of the reasons why I said that I like the idea of 5e is because in Pathfinder, you could do this in Pathfinder 2, by the way, where, let's say we had our dungeon, right? So we have level 1 of our dungeon here. Okay. Level 1. And this is the ground. This is the ground level. So we've got our main entrance that everybody knows about down to level 1, but there's actually also this secret entrance located over here in a nearby cave that maybe the players can find later on. Anyways, so then we go down to, level 2, And then here's level 3. And here's level 4. And here's level 5. So, we might have a path, stairs that go from 1 to 2. We might have one that goes from 1 all the way down to 4. We have one that goes from 2 to 3 and 2 to 4. And, 3 goes to 4, but 3 does not go to 5. But maybe 2 goes to 5 and then 4 goes to 5. In Pathfinder 2, because of the way that the math works in the game, because it's so tight, realistically, in Pathfinder 2, your level 1 party is not really going to be able to fight on level 3. They could probably fight on level 2. Level 3 might be pushing it. Level 4 is probably right out. So they're somewhat limited in what they can do. And similarly, by the time that the party is level 4 or 5, the challenges back on levels 2 and 3, I expect them to be easier, but in Pathfinder 2, they will be almost a joke on how easy they are. One of the things I like about 5th edition, on paper, you have the much more experience than me, is that because of the very, very gradual progression of bonuses and because of the kind of relatively consistent DCs and ACs across the game, it's totally possible on paper that a group of level 4 or 5 PCs could go back to level 2, and if they were to fight, 20 gnolls or something, right? Or 18 gnolls or something, that those things could give them a serious run for their money. Again, on paper. I don't know that that's actually true, but it feels like it was true to me. When I played 5th edition and I ran it, I know that my party was, I can't remember what level they were, 3 or 4, but I threw like 18 or something ghouls at them. I think they're like CR1, maybe they're CR halves, but I threw like 18 of them at the party. And it seemed like it was a pretty good fight. Now we weren't playing with a grid. It was all theater of the mind. So there's a little bit of handy wavy stuff there, but I thought it was pretty cool. So anyways, my sense for 5e is that that there's a cool element there of where you can use lower level monsters en masse, and they don't become completely outpaced. Like in Pathfinder 2, a level 5 PC is like almost a god compared to even a level 2 monster or a level 1 monster. And there's really no amount of those monsters that you could throw at the party and have them really be a challenge. I don't know that that's the same thing in 5e. Again, based on my very limited experience and my cursory understanding of the game, but I've not played it for 10 years like some people. So that's one of the reasons why I think 5e could really work that way. So let's see here. Derek says, there's nothing so satisfying as a player than getting trashed by a monster at low levels and coming back and mowing down several easily at high levels. I tend to agree with that as well. Every time you talk about this stuff, I'm inspired by this. And I want to toss my campaign in the garbage, but I'm afraid of messing up the execution of the idea. And that's okay, Junderlin. Don't throw away something. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If your campaign's, going well, I think that's great. But it's a cool idea and it's a cool premise. And I think it's really interesting. 5e characters do punch way above their level if they're completely fresh. My party of 11th level characters, fully rested, trounced a CR 24 Demon Lord. So this does get to one of the core problems. I saw someone mention, so let's go problems, okay, with the Megadungeon. I saw someone mention this, and I really want to specifically call this out, okay? No world's largest dungeon. This was a book that was released, God knows, 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago. It was like seriously like this thick. It was a massive dungeon. It was the world's largest dungeon. It was by AEG. Apparently they're trying to re-release it or something. Here's the problem with it, okay? It was full of empty fucking rooms. And I'm going to say something here, and I mean this. No empty rooms. I don't care if it's not realistic. You know why there's empty rooms in dungeons? Even back in the day from the old modules, because they were lazy and they didn't want to fill them with stuff. And it was easier just to fill them with empty rooms. A room could be empty because the player, now empty doesn't mean no fight. Okay. Just, there could be a room that doesn't have a monster. There could be a room that doesn't have a trap, but it cannot just be, it's a 20 by 20 foot by 20 foot room. Bits of debris and dust fill this chamber. There's nothing else. You could have you could have a room that has no trap and has no monster, but it's got an intricate tapestry that highlights some sort of struggle between, between dark and light. And maybe it's a clue, or maybe it's part of a hint to something later in the dungeon, or a puzzle that is going to come on later, or a riddle, or maybe it's a clue about something that's going to go into a next area. I'm talking about truly empty rooms that are literally just taking, shit up on the score. Those things are horrible. They're useless. And more importantly, they're a disincentive for your players to investigate. I cannot stress this enough, to explore. Trust me, I've run an unbelievable amount of dungeons, and it is boring. It is heartbreaking because the players don't know that it's empty. You know that it's empty. So they have this whole big thing about the players are going to these rooms because they want to have experiences, right? They want to have these moments, right? And Daniel, I like that term. He calls them landmark rooms. There's no hazard, there's no treasure, there's no enemies, but they have something about them that is distinctly memorable, And I just think that, our dungeon exists. There's no, right? We're not in a rush, right? We're not trying to pick up our wife so we can go to the airport. This dungeon, let it breathe, we don't, what are we trying to rush through the dungeon for? We don't need to rush through the dungeon, right? So now, that doesn't to say that like every dungeon, another way to think of it is, imagine if you were paying for the dungeon by the room. Let's say you bought the dungeon and you were paying for it by the room, and you pay me my money, and I send you the room, and I go, yeah, it's a 30 foot by 30 foot room with the door that entered into it off the hallway. There's nothing in it. There's just a bunch of dust, maybe a few bones and 2 copper coins. And the players can spend a ton of time here searching and making perception checks, but there's no secret doors. There's no hidden knowledge. There's no extra details, just an empty room. You'd be like, why did I pay you for that room? And while your players aren't paying you for the room, they kind of are, right? That's what they're doing. They're engaging. They want to go and explore. They want to find interesting places. They want to deal with interesting challenges. And dungeons don't have to be dramatic. Now, I agree that it shouldn't be a nonstop combat trapathon, because that can also become very overwhelming. I do think that you need, areas of not immediate. Don't confuse drama with boring, right? So a room can be low drama, but it can still be interesting, right? It could still be interesting, And I think that's really important. Yeah, and that's also a good point too. Sometimes a single room, is actually a series of rooms that are linked together. And if you have a more complex encounter, that can also be very useful. Trevco, if the players can't buy magic items, why are they collecting treasure? I know that there are other things that they can buy, but the modern player wants cool items. Okay, so let's talk about this, because I've struggled and failed in some ways and succeeded in other words. Okay. So why treasure? So part of this is, how do you run a modern mega dungeon? All right. The first thing that we have to consider, so this is called like why treasure, but the first thing we have to consider is we have to change how XP is awarded. You have to. You cannot award XP for encounters. You cannot award XP for traps. You cannot. Now, you could even mess around with, as I did, of awarding XP like as a little thing. Now wait. There's a problem. Everyone's jumping to it. Okay? You have to change how XP is awarded. maybe you give XP, a little bit of XP for fighting monsters, but by and large, I don't think you should give XP for monsters, or very little, okay? Or traps. Now, everyone goes, and you're not wrong to do it, everyone goes, oh, gold for XP, which is how it was done back in the day. I don't think that works in the modern RPG either. And we can talk about this in a sec. We'll talk about this in a second. I think the fundamental idea is fine, but I think that fundamentally it doesn't work the way that we want it to, or the way that it's supposed to do, because, you know, even original D&D had this problem to a certain extent where their XP charts, right, went off the chart. And so, you know, like by the end of the game, they were like in the millions of XP. And so the characters, you know, literally gained millions of gold, or maybe not millions, but hundreds of thousands of gold. But there was also this kind of baseline assumption in original D&D that characters were going to become lords or ladies. They were going to have households and build castles. They were going to, you know, be paying for armies. All right. And so they had something to spend that money on, because there wasn't really this idea of a magical item market. And furthermore, you know, the gold that you were gaining was part of the challenge of play, was just to have the characters. How do you get this much treasure, and how do you get this much gold out? The problem is, so that being said, I still think in original D&D, this was a problem, where the characters, in order to level up, they needed to get way too much XP, which means they needed to get way too much treasure, and they needed to get way too much gold. So our problem is that we want the dungeon to be what is exciting, and we want the dungeon to be what is cool, okay? If the players want to get cool magical items, right? The cool magical items, we want them to get them from the dungeon, because we want to encourage, we want to reward that exploring the dungeon. We want them to go and find these cool items and get these cool dungeon items. Now, I'm not saying that gold, now this is me, I'm just coming up with a bunch of different things here, right? So we're not really worried about the gold, okay? Instead, we're going to take a page that doesn't, out of history, that doesn't get talked about, okay? As much. And that is, I'm going to bring this up here. Loading, please wait. And that is, okay, this is the first edition AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, okay? And this is the treasure. Chainmail +1, chainmail +2, plate mail +1, you know, all the good stuff, okay? We've got robes of the Arc Magi. We've got robes of eyes, rope of climbing. There's something that a lot of people don't really know about this, which is magical items kept were worth experience points. And they were also worth GP, okay? Assuming you had a way to sell it. Original first edition AD&D was kind of weird in some ways, because on one hand, it's like, you know, there are no magical item markets, but they also included this idea of a GP sale value. But there's something that's really interesting to note about this, is if you look at items that, for lack of a better word, are good, you will see that a shield, for example, shield +1, its XP value, if you keep it, is 250 XP. If you sell it, it's worth 2,500 gold, which would mean it would be worth 2,500 XP. But let's look at something a little bit more unusual, okay? What about something like horseshoes of speed? Well, horseshoes of speed are only 5 times more valuable instead of 10 times more valuable, okay? Ion stones, which everybody knows can increase your stats and, don't take up any slots on your body. Those have a massive multiplier. It's almost 20x. All right. And the reason for this is because Gygax was, in his own way, basically pointing out that some items get more utility, okay, in their use, and other items get more utility, aren't as useful. But you want them because they're worth more experience to a certain extent. And I should also note that if you sold the item, you didn't get the experience points. You only got the experience point if you kept the item. And this has made me think or question about, in a modern game where people don't really care so much about the gold, what they care about are the treasure items. What they care about is the cool, fun treasure. What I think is that instead of gold for XP, what we should really be focused on is magic items for XP. Because this is doing something that is so important. It is creating a multiple rewards for the thing that we want them to do. We want our group to explore the dungeon. We want our group to find magical items. They want to find magical items. So let's give them XP for that. But original D&D taught us that there was multiple ways to get XP. You get XP from fighting monsters, which again, I don't think is entirely out of question. I just think we need to reduce it and we need to make it a lesser component, right? We want to make sure that the players don't feel penalized or punished if they don't fight every monster in the dungeon, right? And in fact, we don't even want, a lot of people go, well, what about if we just encounter them, but we don't have to fight them? I mean, avoid the encounter entirely and not fight them. But the thing that we really want them to do is explore, right? Hell, exploring is how they're going to find these cool magical items anyways, right? We want people to explore. So it's real simple. What gets rewarded gets repeated. Now, this could be as complex or as simple as you want. You could give a big XP bonus that is appropriate to the level when the group goes to a new level, right? Or you could do it for every new room that they encounter. And the bonus experience point that they get is tied to the level of that room. So in finding and discovering new rooms on a lower level is worth more XP because the dungeon is dangerous and more deadly. So you can give XP for finding rooms, new rooms. You could give XP for finding new exits or entrances, stairs. You could give XP for finding secret doors, passages, right? So the idea here is that, yes, CDA demand, it is kind of like Forbidden Lands. Forbidden Lands wants to encourage you and reward you to find these objectives. Now, these sound like objectives to me. No, Derek. Remember, that implies that there's a meta plot that will be punished if the characters don't do this. A game has to have a point. The point of our dungeon-based game is to engage with and explore the dungeon. All we're simply doing is making sure that our reward systems align with what the characters are doing. Take care, Nutrimancer. Similarly, I think something that is often overlooked. I love the idea. This is an old Dungeon Craft. Dungeon Craft, one of the rules of Dungeon Craft, I think it's the second rule of Dungeon Craft, says whenever you design an element for your campaign, this is back when people built their own campaigns, create a secret for it. Okay. One of the things I love, and this is how you make your game interesting. And again, it's not a mega dungeon, it's not a plot. It's just the fun of discovery. It's the exhilaration of discovery, of being curious. I love the idea, as I'm creating my dungeon, of creating, I used to use note cards, secrets. Now, some of these secrets might be, for lack of a better word, it's a level 20 secret, right? It's like something like deep and dark in the recesses of the dungeon. But I could also have a secret that is a level 3 secret. Another way to think of this is lore, you know. The thing what you do though is when the players figure out something about your dungeon, when they put this thing and that thing together and they figure something out, you reward them. You give them XP. In fact, I personally love the idea of even kind of just handing them the card and like saying, here, yep, you you succeeded. Here's the lore card. You know, because I don't want you to have to remember it for all time. But basically, you've put the clues together. You have discovered this. And this might be something that they've been piecing together throughout the course of the entire dungeon, or maybe it's just something that is tied to that particular level. But it rewards not the PCs, it rewards the players. And sure, maybe they use their PCs every once in a while to say, like, you know, there's a strange mural, and they're like, like, I want to interpret this. Like, what is this? What is this symbol supposed to be representing? And you're like, oh, cool, make a check. Yeah, you think it represents a symbol of fire, and you're like, oh, wait a second. Maybe that is tied to that other thing that we discovered and blah, blah, blah. Do you think D&D should have recall knowledge like Pathfinder? No, I do not. I think recall knowledge is terrible, honestly. Recall knowledge, actually, Sorrel, let me actually tell you about something. Remember how I said that Pathfinder 2 is designed to shortcut these mechanics because they found that people did not enjoy them? Recall knowledge exists so that you can shortcut the exploration point of discovering the information of the dungeon, right? Because the idea is that back in the day, if you wanted to learn about the dungeon, if you wanted to learn about your location, you had to engage with the environment. You had to explore it. You had to poke under things and figure stuff out and actually try it. Pathfinder 2 doesn't want you to do that, right? It wants to just say, yeah, we don't want to do that. We want to get to the, you know, the fun part. We want to get to the action, the excitement. We want to get to the plot. We want to get to the cool elements of the really cool fight or the really cool, you know, villain's journal that outlines their master plan. So they introduce recall knowledge so that you can just deal with it in a dice roll and move on and move on and move on and move on. This is a slow burn. And to be fair, recall knowledge is vitally important when you have time, you know, when you're on the clock. You've got to get through this adventure. You've got to stop this thing. If you don't, everyone will die. So what if the players don't figure it out? What are you supposed to do? Say like, well, I guess you guys don't figure it out and everyone dies. No, you have this safety valve of saying, well, make a recall knowledge check. Oh, you figure it out. You know where to go next. Remember, we don't have a meta plot in our dungeon. The PCs do not need to figure out any of this. They don't have to. I'm rewarding them. I'm encouraging them. I hope that they do, but they don't have to. And that's the key. The players could let all of this information go right over their heads and never think about it twice. And that's okay. They don't need to do it. And if they want to do it, then they get rewarded for it. And hopefully, what gets rewarded gets repeated, and that will encourage them to look a little closer and pay a little bit more attention and put together the pieces of your puzzle. And I think that a well-constructed Megadungeon ends up looking like an onion. It has or an ogre, right? It has layers where you have this idea of this core secret, something about your dungeon, and then surrounding it are these layers of hints and clues and rumors that the PCs encounter as they go down your dungeon. And some PCs might figure it out sooner, and some PCs might need all of the clues. But the point is, once they figured out the secret, that's when you reward them. And it's really awesome to show how that thing connected to that thing, connected to that thing, connected to that thing, and it all kind of points to this cool element. Now, is that necessary to solve the adventure? No, but it's just a fun detail. I'm trying to think of a great, like a metaphor or an example for that, but like, oh goodness. I know like a lot of amusement parks have these, like they're almost like little Easter eggs, like at Cedar Point and stuff like that, where like there's like little things that if you know what you're looking for, you'll see them. And it's kind of like a fun little thing of like being like, oh, you know, look at where that's where this thing used to be. And that's where this thing used to be. And you can like learn more about the place where you're at. Cedar Point's an amusement park here in the game. But like, you know, being able to learn about this environment is very rewarding for some people. And then because we want to encourage that, we just give experience for that. Anything that you want to give, anything that you want to encourage, you give experience for. XP for treasure, but the XP is based off spelling out the item's name with Scrabble tiles. Encourage the players to look for treasures with Z's and Q's. It's an interesting idea. Well, again, you don't have to worry. That's the beautiful thing, Junderlin. You don't have to worry about balancing the math. I mean, you should try. You should think about it, but it doesn't matter if you're wrong. The game will automatically self-balance. If you award too much XP, the players will level up quicker, and they'll probably either stay on their level and continue to get worse and worse and worse XP, or they'll jump ahead. Okay. Worst case scenario, your dungeon, which they were not going to finish all of anyways, finishes, I don't know, maybe a couple months early. Okay. If you're awarding too little, you know, maybe you see that players aren't engaging with it, or maybe they're leveling up really slow and they're exploring a lot of the dungeons, and that's okay. They're taking a slow burn. And you can always just like tick it up a little bit as, you know, increase the rewards to get to the point where they're, you know, finally engaging with them and they're leveling at a rate that they find enjoyable. But even if you fuck up and you give it too much or you make something too difficult, it doesn't matter because you're not forcing them. The only reason balance matters is because we're talking about adventures where we as the GMs are forcing our players to go through these encounters. They have to be this strong so that they fight this monster, which they have to fight. And if I'm going to force my players to fight this monster, then I'm obligated to make sure they're getting the right XP, to be the right level at the right time. And that's tough, which is why people have gotten rid of XP and they just do milestone, because they say, look, let's stop beating around the bush. The dungeon wants them to be level 5 at this exact level. The adventure wants them to be level 5 at this exact point. Why are we beating around the bush here? Let's just make them level 5 when they get to that point, which is fine. But what you've done is removed all incentive to take your own actions in order to improve your own progression. And that is at the core of, I think, the Dungeons and Dragons experience. And using a simple milestone-based experience like that, I think it twists the game. And maybe it's a requirement because of the tight math when you're playing like a very linear type campaign, where you have to sort of follow this set progression. But that's not what we want here. And quite frankly, we don't need it in a mega dungeon. So, you know, while I think gold can work, what I'd love to experiment with the idea of is taking your D&D 5e or taking your Pathfinder 2 game and drastically cutting the gold, right? Instead of millions of gold or thousands of gold, right? We're talking about like, you know, you're finding like a couple hundred copper and then maybe like at level 5 or level 6 or level 7, you know, you're finding like, oh my gosh, a couple hundred silver, and taking the GP value of the game and crushing it down to a very small amount, to the point where, you know, an in-stay is not, I mean, at low level, an in-stay might be kind of expensive. And sure, at a certain point, the party gets high enough level where they're not worried about it, but they're not like, how much is the inn? Oh, it's a couple gold. And you're like, oh, we have 25,000. Now, the problem with that is that creates this pressure because you're like, well, then how are they going to buy their magical items? And I'm suggesting is they don't. I'm suggesting that they... Now, Daniel says, why would someone risk life and limb for the copper wage of an unskilled laborer? Well, Daniel, I think there's a couple of things to note. Number one, at a certain point, the characters will become, quote unquote, wealthy. I mean, the problem with D&D is that by the time, assuming a character in D&D is motivated by wealth, then by the time they're level 2, they have more money than like the richest person in their hometown. So they should retire. If instead we stretch that out and say, no, like a character, if your character wants to be like wealthy like a king, they need to be like level 10 or level 13 before they have like hundreds or maybe thousands of gold pieces. So you stretch that character's motivation out. Secondly, part of the reason they're going into the dungeon is also because they want the magical treasures, okay? And the magical treasures are inside the dungeon. And the third thing, Daniel, and this is where we have to get this kind of goes back to what I was talking about before. It's a role-playing game because I'm going to use everyone else's terms, not my terms. Don't make it into Critical Role. If someone doesn't want to risk their life and limb for copter wage and unskilled labor, then say, okay, great, you go become a peasant and a bartender. Do you want to make a new character, or do you not want to play in this campaign? Like, the whole point of a D&D campaign is to get players who are engaged with the core premise. If what your players want is something different, I'm suggesting, number one, you should not use a Megadungeon. And number two, I'm kind of suggesting maybe you don't use D&D. I do think that D&D is kind of expressly designed for this kind of style of play. I mean, there are some minor instances and hiccups in there, but for the most part, I think that is, the core of what they were trying to go for when they released this game in 2014. They moved away from this idea, especially with 4th edition. And the market said, no, we don't want that. We want our old school D&D crawling through a dungeon, getting treasures, and we don't want balanced magical item. Like 3rd edition had a formula for calculating the value of a magical item. In 4th edition D&D, there was a formula. The magical items were in the player's handbook. That's how in your face they were about being player centric. And the people said, we don't like this. We want our old school game. 5th edition D&D was designed to be, in my opinion, the official take on the OSR, cleaned up with a couple of modern mechanics. But that's the reason why the balance isn't that good. The balance wasn't good in 1st edition and 2nd edition AD&D either, because it barely existed. They didn't care about that stuff because the audience that they were going for, they didn't think we're going to be doing Critical Role or super balanced tactical combats, or that's why in the original DMG, magical items, they didn't even really give you a price for them, because the idea was that you don't buy magical items. There's something you find. They're infinitely valuable. And for whatever reason, that is not the direction that the audience took the game and went with. So for me, the single greatest thing that you need, there's two important and major things that you need to deal with to make a dungeon interesting. The first is figuring out what you're going to give experience for. Okay. And I recommend that we need to think about giving experience points for exploration, for discovering lore or secrets, for finding fun magical items in the dungeon, and making it so that gold is actually the more rare of resources. And, for a game like, and Sanderson took my what I was going to say. So Pathfinder 2nd edition, there are required magical items. Notably, you need fundamental runes, and you need for your weapons and for your armor. But you can just use automatic bonus progression. Or Sanderson, you can have the only thing that maybe gets sold in town are fundamental runes. But you make the price of them much, much less, right? To the point where a +2 rune is only 35 gold, because in your campaign, 35 gold is a lot. And so you just crush everything down. But I like the idea of using automatic bonus progression the best. And it's my understanding that in 5th edition, you don't need to have any magical item, which is another reason why I kind of like 5th edition for this, because in 5th edition, you don't need to get a +1 weapon at a certain level or your character is not performing well to the math. So that, I think, is really, really important. That being said, remember what I just said. Our game doesn't expressly need any sort of balance, right? Sure, if you're fighting the CR appropriate, if you're fighting the right level monster in Pathfinder 2, you're you need a +1 item or you need a striking rune. But that's only because we're assuming that you need to be fighting these monsters at a certain progression in a certain, way. If you get rid of that and you say, yeah, in my dungeon, there are potency runes, there are striking runes, and when you find them, you'll find them. But there's no guarantee that you'll find them. And you're well, okay, well, if I'm level 4 and I find monster, if I'm level 4 and I go to level 4 and I'm fighting level 4 creatures and not everyone in the party has a +1 potency rune and a striking rune, how are we supposed to be able to beat the monsters? And I'll say, you probably can't. Sounds like you should go spend some more time on levels 2 and 3 and find those runes. Or, I don't know, level up so much that you don't even need the weapons until you eventually find them later. Because the only reason we talk about people needing those bonuses in Pathfinder is because the game is throwing you against challenges that you don't have any say against, and those challenges are going to be at your level or greater, and quote unquote the math needs it. But if you're in a world where you can go to whatever level you want anyways, if your party skips that stuff, then they skip that stuff, you know, and that's okay. So there's part of me that's kind of interesting by that. Imagine if, you know, a fundamental rune in Pathfinder 2 actually felt like treasure, not because it was a given that everyone was going to have it. I think that's really, really interesting. People like getting magic items, and that's one of the reasons my players don't like 5th edition. So that is a more interesting problem, Dr. Waits. Because obviously 5th edition has this, you know, this idea of you only have these 3 attunement slots. I don't know enough about 5th edition to truly answer this. I don't mind that there's a limit. I think that makes it kind of interesting. I think it makes it more of a choice instead of just, hey, let's just pick up all the different items and just, you know, equip them all and become like the magic item Christmas tree from 3rd edition. I think that's, you know, I think that's a problem too. But maybe there's an in-between number, you know? Maybe it's 7, right? 7 is kind of a, right? It's a holy number. It's a celestial number. It's a sacred number, 7. Maybe it's 7, you know? 7 chakras. Aren't there 7 chakras? You know, maybe you have one, you know, item for each chakra or something. Maybe that's a better, you know, system. For sure. Because I agree. 3 I think is a little too low, you know, and I think that's part of the fun. But I think magic item Christmas treeing is not the, like in 3rd edition or 4th edition especially, is not the right answer. Additionally, Trevko says, aren't there monsters that are immune to non-magic weapons? This is kind of what I'm going for. Now, obviously, modern day games don't put this hard limit, right? Like they used to back in the day on what a party can fight and they can't fight just because they don't have a magic weapon. But let's assume for a moment. Well, let's say there's a section on level 3 of our dungeon. Okay. And, you know, the stairs came in here and, you know, there's, you know, some rooms over here and there's this area over here. And, you know, I'm just drawing here. And then let's say that on level 3, there's an area that's kind of off on its own. Okay. And I think people are talking about calling this a district. I would call this kind of a region, right? So let's say there's an area over here. Now, this area has rooms of its own, but it's kind of self-contained on level 3, right? It's not part of its own thing. And let's say in this region, there are only monsters that can be hit that you need to have a magic weapon to fight in. It would be really difficult or impossible. So the group says, hey, we don't have magic weapons. And they come into this area. And they get into the first fight, and it doesn't go well for them. They have to flee. They have to expend their spells, or they, you know, barely escape with their lives, or something worse happens. And they say, well, that sucks. We don't have +1 weapons. Great. This area is effectively off limits to you. There is essentially a lock here that you don't have the key to. Now, maybe your characters can go take magical spells like runic weapon or magic weapon. Maybe you can get oils of runic weapon or magic weapon. Maybe you can go find +1 potency weapons and make your weapons magical. But basically this is giving your players a challenge, something to overcome. Go find the magic items. Go use the spells. Go find potions or something of that nature. Then this area will become unlocked to you. And maybe, you know, if the rest of the, you know, maybe in other places on the level, there's level 3 treasure and there's a level 3 treasure and there's a level 4 treasure. But maybe in this region, there's a level 5 treasure and a level 4 treasure and a level 5 treasure. And you're like, oh, this area of the dungeon seems like it's harder and it's tougher. And the GM is rewarding us more for fighting and dealing with this extra level of complication. That is incredibly satisfying, not just to the PC, but to the player. And part of the thing, what I'm trying to do with the Megadungeon is I'm trying to target the player, because they're the ones who are sitting down to play your game. And I want them to be engaged, and I want them to have an emotional, fun experience. And I think good Megadungeons can really, really do this. Let's see here. Looking here. Yeah. 7 kingdoms, 7 hells, and 7 slots for magical shit. Exactly, Fab. Exactly, Fab. And it's true. I mean, that being said, don't underestimate the compellingness of +1, right? Because, you know, numbers are nice. Numbers go burr. It's why people enjoy getting stat increases and proficiency increases, and right. People like getting powerful items, and I think that's totally reasonable. The key is, if you give players money and then you say you can buy any items you want, then they're going to go, I want the +1 item. I want the +2 item. I want the +2 armor. I want the +2 shield. I want the +2 sword. Because that's where the boring and the default comes into. But if they're not in control of the magical items that they get, I think that's really interesting. Now, I'm going to swap over to Pathfinder 2 and give them a nod of being superior here. The runes system of Pathfinder 2 makes it very easy to award treasure, because this solves the issue. Because in our modern day games, players do specialize in certain weird magical items. Back in the day, this wasn't a problem because there was no, feat that you took that made you a specialist in the great axe. But Pathfinder 2 is nice because you can just give runes as treasure, and the players, or even a magical item, and then they can take the rune off and they can put it onto their item. So this means that it's a lot easier to just, award treasure. But part of the fun of this is watching the players, kind of have to improvise and use the treasure that they get rather than the treasure that they want. And I think that's kind of, that's kind of fun to a certain extent. So the first thing we have to figure out is XP. All right. And how we change it. All right. This one's the toughest one. Okay. How to stop the 15-minute adventuring day. This is probably the more complicated question. Okay. So the first one is, how do we figure out the XP? This is the reward system. Okay. But in this case, what we're trying to do is set up a situation where the risk balances out by having increased rewards. So how do we do this if the players go back to town, or, go rest to full after every fight, right? It's a real problem, and it doesn't have an immediate, obvious solution. So we're going to have to come up with something. Well, there's 2 ways. There's the stick, and then there's the carrot. You could use both. You could use one. So when I ran my Megadungeon in Pathfinder 1, I used the carrot approach. I've talked about this before on the channel. But basically the way the carrot approach worked is, essentially, the longer the PCs stayed in the dungeon, the larger the XP bonus became. So this is me giving them the carrot. It basically says, look, you could go into room 1 and then go back to town and rest. And then you could go into room 2 and come back and rest. And then you could go into room 3 and come back to town and rest. And let's just say that that gave you 10, 10, 10 experience points. Cool. You got 30 experience points, right? And, you know, going back to town, if you make it like literally instantaneous, like where you just go, okay, you're back to town and now you're back in room 2. And you're making it probably a little bit too easy, but let's just say you're not making it like a real pain in the ass. But, you know, so it took them however long to make 30 XP. But if you say, hey, if you go to room 1, you're going to get 10 experience. And then if you go to room 2, you're going to get 15 experience. And then if you go to room 3, without going back to town, you're going to get 20 experience. Now, instead of getting 30 XP, these players have gotten 45. They've gotten more experience for the same 3 sets of rooms or 3 sets of encounters as they would have if they had done it one at a time. Now, how do you make this make sense in the game? When people say that, like about treasure for XP, I go, does this even make sense that you get experience points for fighting monsters? I don't even think it does either. Hey, Darth Gorlock, what's up?
Darth Gorlock tipped $15. Dungeon stream. Let's go. Also, looks like I came in at the perfect time since we are starting to talk about rewards.
Yes, we just started talking about rewarding. Well, specifically, we're talking about rewarding, but we're also talking about the 15-minute adventuring day and how to prevent that. But thank you, Darth Gorlock, for the tip. And yes, dungeon streams indeed. I'm very passionate about dungeons. I think they are the ultimate expression of RPGing. Not like storytelling, because like that's where you can get other things. But in terms of like what I think of an RPG, I actually think of a dungeon. So this creates this interesting dynamic where there's no reason. The players could totally just go back to town after every fight. You're not forcing them. They could do that if that's what they want to do. But if they stick with it and they stay in the dungeon, then this bonus experience continues to escalate. This is by the way, and I'm ignoring any sort of procedural elements right now. Okay, so that means I'm ignoring things like random encounters. Okay, random encounters are more of a stick. Okay, this is another area where I think 5th edition has an advantage. Right now, again, I'm not an expert at 5th edition, so please in chat tell me why I'm an idiot and I'm wrong. But assuming this is a key. Okay, this assumes you don't have infinite healing. Okay. Case in point, when I used to do Megadungeons in 3rd edition D&D and Pathfinder 1, I banned Cure Light Wounds wands. Okay, because Cure Light Wounds wands made healing essentially infinite. Okay, but 5th edition has a couple advantages, which is again, there probably is some subclass from some new, web article that or some third-party book that gives you infinite healing. But assuming you're using the hit dice and short rest mechanic, this is really easy to do in 5th edition. All you simply say is your bonus XP keeps going up until it resets on a long rest. Right? So in this way, the characters can take short rests, assuming that they could, figure out a way to manage the short rest. But of course, remember, the short rests are going to consume their hit dice, which are eventually going to run out. And eventually, the characters won't have hit dice to recover hit points, and they won't have spells to recover hit points. They'll run out of potions. And so, at a certain point, this is going to be, become a real problem. So we got a couple of things in chat here. I've done double XP special weekends whenever my group wanted to play 2 days in a row, and they seem more excited to explore and get through as many rooms of the dungeon as possible. Right. Yeah, it's bonus weekend. Yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, that is 100%. Trust me, the carrot can work very, very well. Phil says dungeon delving is definitely the purest expression of RPGs, and I tend to agree. Full heal after every fight in PF2, so why not? Yeah, so Dr. Waits, that is a problem, and we'll talk about it. And Punctual, this is true. Fronts and factions are great here, and if the players leave a lot, that can cause problems. the problem is that can also become problematic for the GM, right? It can be very difficult for you. It can be a lot of work for you to have to constantly update your dungeon every time the players leave. And that can be kind of a pain in the ass. When we played my Pathfinder 1 Megadungeon, the way that they were, we had a logbook, and the way that they were entitled was Expedition, right? So, Expedition number 1, right, is what it was listed as, and then Expedition number 5. Well, the joke was that if you look through this book, it would end up getting written that it would say Expedition number 5, A, number 5, B, number 5, C, number 5, D. And I believe there's one that even got all the way to F. Now, what does that mean? It means that in game, they were on the same, they hadn't been back to town. They were in the dungeon for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sessions without taking a long rest. So, and there were no Cure Light Wounds wands. All right. So, my players viewed it as a legendary challenge to them, to try to get as far as they could. If they had to go back to town, they viewed it as like a complete failure, because especially once they got to about this point, the bonus XP was so nice. They're like, we can't go back. It's going to reset to 0. We have to keep going. And they would just put, out of the frying pan into the fire, and they would just go, all the way. So, we had these really, awesome moments where but again, I wasn't forcing them to do this. They could have gone back at any time, but this for them was enough of an incentive, that they would do this. Rest casting makes healing effectively infinite, good berries in particular. I'm not sure what rest casting means. So you mean like short rest? Is that what we're talking about? Because I will admit that if you have infinite healing, as you do in Pathfinder 2, then you have a problem. Darth Gorlock says, having healing tied primarily to going all the way back to town downtime, I think is the way to go. Turns out older editions knew what they were doing with healing. Yeah, so of course, there's a couple things to note about old editions of the game, which is that Dr. Waits, you don't even need focus spells in Pathfinder 2. You just need treat wounds to heal people up. So the problem is that in original old school D&D, is that there definitely wasn't a carrot. You didn't get a bonus. There were a lot of sticks, though. Okay, so in original old school D&D, okay, in old school D&D, right, OD&D, you got back 1 HP per night. It might have been 1 HP per level per night in like 2nd edition, but I think you got back so little, hit points that resting like to full, like, you're talking about a week to 2 week endeavor, right? Like it's a long period of time. And that actually is nice because it means that as a group, you can't just think of it in terms of like, well, we'll run back to the town, we'll sleep, we'll get everything back, we'll come back 100% full tomorrow. When you start telling people like it's going to take you weeks to recover, people suddenly get a little bit more antsy because they understand that, hey, especially if balance isn't a factor in our game. So, the stick was, hey, if you go back to town, it's going to take you a long time. And while you're gone, okay, the monsters are going to reinforce. Well, that's okay. They're worth, oh, right. The monsters are worth almost no experience. So all those monsters that we fought, okay, so let's look at it. Let's think of it another way. Let's think of it from a flowchart perspective, okay? Let's say there's room 1, and we'll make it really easy, right? Here's our entrance. So you have room 1 into room 2, into room 3, and in room 3, there's, some sort of, big, scary boss monster type thing. And there's also, yay, there's our big treasure, okay, in room 3. Now, in original D&D, and let's say that there's monsters, right, in these rooms. So in original D&D, the players go in and they go, look, we can fight these monsters and they will give us, you know, some, but when I say some, I mean like a very small amount of experience points. And it's definitely not worth the fact that we can actually die from these things. But you go in and you fight the first monster and kill it, and you fight the second monster and kill it. You know, this group is being particularly bold. They took on 2 encounters. And they say, hey, before we fight the boss and go get the treasure, let's go back to town and let's full rest. And the GM says, okay, but that's going to take, you know, a week or more, 2 weeks. And the party goes, that's fine. So they come back, and guess what? Those monsters are back. Now, if this was tomorrow, it wouldn't really make much sense. I mean, at a certain point, it wouldn't make any sense. Maybe it could for a little while or something, but it does kind of beg the strain, the realism. Well, now the party goes, shit, well, now we have to go through all these monsters again. And these monsters are scary. They're not necessarily pushover, right? We're playing a game where we're not superheroes. So we could potentially die here. So they go and they fight the 2 monsters, and then they go, damn, we got our butts kicked. Let's go back to town. They killed the monsters, but then the monsters come back. And again, they're technically getting a little bit of experience points, but nothing for the amount of risk that they're taking. So this option of doing this didn't exist in original OD&D because the healing was so slow that you know, it was very reasonable that the creatures would get replaced. Furthermore, original D&D also came up with this idea. Now, this idea doesn't make sense in a modern adventure, because in a modern adventure, you know, the characters are the big bad heroes, the big damn heroes. They're the only ones who can save the day. They're going to go fight the boss, and they're going to go fight the monsters, and they're going to be the ones who to overcome them. And actually, I was kind of enjoying. I rarely enjoy anime, but Bob and Tim were watching this Dungeon Meshi show, and I was like, who the hell are these there was a bunch of new characters. And I said, who the hell are these characters? They go, oh, that's another party. And I went, oh, that's so great. Because in original D&D, one of the things that was on a random encounter table was actually other adventuring parties. Because you weren't the only heroes in town. You weren't even really heroes. You were adventurers. So the idea was like, you know, it doesn't make, like, for example, imagine you're playing through an adventure path. You're playing through Rise of the Rune Lords, right? And you get to the end of the first adventure, right? And you're going to kill Nualia, the Asamar, the evil Asamar lady. And you kick in the door, and she's already dead. And there's like another group of adventurers there, you know, wiping their swords off of blood, and they're picking through her treasure, and they're, you know, and you're like, wait, what happened? You're like, well, you guys went back to town a bunch. We came in from out of town, and we took out the monsters. Actually, it was really easy, because what you did is you came in and you killed off all the trash. So then we waltzed in, we killed the boss, and then we took the treasure, and we went out of here. So there's also this world where it might seem punitive, but I did say it was a stick. But like in original D&D, if your characters were going back to town all the time, then somebody might snake the treasure from them, you know, because of that. Additionally, when you're inside the dungeon, okay, there are scary monsters, and scary monsters do have a chance of killing you. There's also random encounters, and sometimes a random encounter might occur and might kill you. But that's okay. It's worth it, because inside this dungeon is treasure, is magical items, is loot, is coins, is experience points. It's the stuff that you want, right? It's treasure. It's XP. It's all the stuff that you want. But when you leave and go back to town, okay, there's also chances for random encounters. Well, now, remember, a random encounter is just as likely to kill you in the dungeon as it is outside of the dungeon. But a random encounter is not going to drop treasure. A random encounter is not going to give you cool magical items. A random encounter is a punishment. It is just something that is going to maybe kill you. At the best case scenario, is that you lose no resources whatsoever, and you gain an insignificant amount of experience points. So if you are going back to town after every room to go rest up, these random encounters are going to bury you. In fact, you want to avoid random encounters as much as possible because they're all risk with very little reward. So then the measure of your play goes, look, we have to go from the town to the dungeon. We're going to have some random encounters. We can't help that. But once we get to the dungeon, we want to stay in there for as long as we can to avoid having to keep rolling through these random encounters. Because when we're in the dungeon, that's where we're going to find the treasure. That's where we're going to get rewarded. If random encounters have the same chance of giving you XP as anything else, and they have the same requirement to award you with treasure as anything else, then they're not a bad thing. In fact, they're actually a good thing. They're going to progress your character. So they were very much a stick mechanic in old school D&D. Now, that gets us to the problem of the modern day game, and of course the Pathfinder 2. Which is, tangentially related, but what about Wandering Monsters? I think I was just talking about Wandering Monsters, wasn't I? Unless I'm behind on the chat. These are solutions that old school games had for the modern game that we need to think of solutions for in terms of how we would run our Megadungeon. Now, I prefer the carrot. I think the carrot works just fine. Giving people bonuses and encouraging them to stay in the dungeon longer. However, in the event that you guys have, so let's address Pathfinder 2 first. Okay. So the first thing that I think you have to do with Pathfinder 2 is you have to make it so that the wounded state only resets on a long rest. I think if the wounded state resets every time you get treat wounds or every time you're healed to full, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to grind the party down. Okay. So I think what you need to do is only reset on the long rest. For 5e, I really love, there's an optional rule in the DMG, at least it was in the DMG 2014 edition, where long rests are a week and short rests are a day. I used this when I ran my game and it worked really well. Really, really well. And we were inspired by Torchbearer, of course, because I've been playing a lot of Torchbearer. But what would end up happening is there was town, right? There was town. And then the players had their camp. Okay. And then there was, the dungeon. And what ended up happening is the players went from town, right, into the dungeon, with a dungeon for a little while, leave the dungeon, go back to their camp, take a short rest, right? Because they can't take a long rest. They'd have to be out in the wilderness for a week. So they would take a short rest, and that took the whole night. And then they would go back to the dungeon, and then they would go back to camp, and they would do some short rests, and then they would go back to the dungeon, and finally they'd be like, okay, our hit dice are running low, our spells are running low, we're going to finally go back to town, and we're going to take a week, and we're going to do a long rest. And that cycle of play felt really, really good. So I really like that a lot. It's called the gritty realism rule. Thank you, Ponchual. Let me see here. We got some couple of stuff here. Dr. Waits, that's the draw steel approach, right? More encounters make you more powerful. Yes, in draw steel, more encounters do make you more powerful. In this approach, I'm not saying that they make you more powerful. I'm just simply saying that you actually get weaker, but the game actually gives you more experience points for doing that. In this case, I'm literally rewarding you with experience points. And I'm not worried about breaking the balance of my game because I'm assuming that the point of this game is that you want to level up. And there's no plot that you're going to ruin by being too high of level, if that makes any sense. Darth. I am thinking of running Abomination Vaults for PF2E, and I've been thinking about Megadungeons and PF2E. I will probably use an HP pool that is some multiplier of your max HP that only recovers at downtime, along with Wounded staying until downtime. And that's basically you incorporating healing surges into the game, and I think that's fine. Yes, that's okay. That One Ring, yes, does that, right? Where you don't, just sleeping out in the wilderness isn't a heal. You have to go to a haven. You have to go to Rivendell. And, you know, you have to go to Lorien. And when, even in the books, in the movies, they kind of make it doesn't seem like that. But in the books, they were there for like weeks or months recovering from their journeys on the road. What's up, Ton? Nice to see you. Abomination Vaults for PF2E felt pointless. Rules as written. Yes, I kind of felt so too. Because the whole point of a dungeon is to have this tension of resources going down, right? But you're so close to getting the treasure. And Pathfinder 2 didn't really deliver, you know, on that premise. Boothby says, so the party makes it through 3 rooms. They go back to rest. They come back and the dungeon is repopulated. They get through 3 rooms and they go back to the rest. Is it the GM's job to make that interesting or the players? And I kind of said this at the beginning, Boothby, I think before you came in. This puts the players in the driver's seat. I argue that in this style of campaign, it is not my job to make that interesting. Okay? The players are, now, if that is the only thing that they can do, then I do have a responsibility to make it interesting. If the only 3 encounters that they can go on that I'm presenting them with are in that row, then it is my responsibility to make them interesting because that is my job. But instead, I've created an entire environment. They can go where they want. If they don't want to keep going to those same encounters, they don't have to. And that means the pressure isn't on me to make that interesting or to make that achievable or to make that, you know, doable or anything like that. Rather, it is on them to decide how they want to manage their time and manage their resources. Now, Abomination Vaults, when we played it, was a little interesting. And one of the reasons it was a little interesting was I used random encounters. Now, the book, it like has this like super vague mention of random encounters. And it's like, you know, these are cool sometimes, but you don't have to use them. But if you do, it'd be cool. And that's it. That's like the advice they give you. There's like barely, there's like no like random table or anything like that. So I had to make a random table. And when my players were in Abomination Vaults and they took a short rest, I would roll a random encounter. Yeah, they do not give you a table. Yeah. And there were a couple of times where the party was interrupted by resting and trying to treat heat, you know, recover wounds and focus points, and it you know, almost destroyed them or almost killed them. In fact, there was a time where they were trying to rest, and they got a random encounter. And then that random encounter triggered another random encounter, and it almost killed them, even though the fights were like low difficulty. Hey.
Shadram tipped $10. I'm 45 minutes behind, but loving this stream. Here's $10 to encourage more design theory chats like this.
Well, thank you, Shadram. I appreciate it. You got a lot to catch up to when you get here. Thank you for that tip. And yeah, I mean, you know, this is deep stuff, and it's hard for me to like give you guys like, you know, a short 10-minute answer to just like, here's everything that you need to do. So it's more about the theory. So I agree, Shadram, but thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, there's several PF2 adventures where they say that, and then they just give you nothing. They're like, yeah, you could do this, but don't want. Right. And the problem that I have with Abomination Vaults is, you know, don't get me wrong, some of the levels are really cool. I think level 1, level 2, level 3, I think they're all really interesting. Level 4, not as interesting. Level 5 was cool. 6, not, for obvious reasons. Bar. 7 and 8, you know, I mean, it got a little long in the tooth in that last adventure. That one level was way too big. But the problem I really had with Abomination Vaults is, at the end of the day, it's just a Pathfinder 2 dungeon, which means that it's just really small. It's really cramped together, and everything is kind of bunched together. That being said, I also really love the idea of node-based dungeon design. And like when I'm going to be doing Torchbearer, I'm going to mostly do node-based dungeon, you know, essentially point crawls. But one of the things I think that you need to think about it as is we need to think of the dungeon as being more dispersed, right? So let's say that this is level 1 of our dungeon. Okay. So this is level 1 of our dungeon. Okay. And, you know, here is our entrance, our primary entrance. Okay. And that leads to this area. And from that area, we can go here. Make this really basic. Okay, so this is level 1 of our dungeon. Now, are these rooms? No, these are areas. They might have numerous rooms within them. They might have numerous encounters within them, right? Maybe this is the Goblin Town, okay? And part of the premise of this idea is that within this region of the dungeon, it is very likely, perhaps even very possible, that an encounter in one of these areas is going to trigger an encounter in another one of these areas. Or maybe put another way, it is very unlikely that you would be able to take a 10-minute rest here or a short rest here. Okay? This is not going to happen within this cluster of encounters or rooms. So this gives us a unique thing to do in Pathfinder 2, which is maybe it's okay if we just throw some low and moderate encounters at our party with the expectation that they are going to fight several of them in a row, relatively speaking, before they get a chance to rest or heal up. But what this kind of does is it kind of isolates this region of the dungeon level from these other areas, right? Like this might be the undead crypt area of level 1. Okay. And, at a certain point, basically, if you come into Goblin Town and you kind of wipe everything out, then in 5e terms, you have earned your short rest. In Pathfinder 2 terms, you have earned your ability to take 4 or 5 hours to spam focus spells and spam treat wounds to heal everybody up to full, right? You've kind of cleared that section of the dungeon. And you're relatively safe there. I don't know if you want to take a long rest there, but you're relatively safe there. And then you can kind of move on and tackle another area, right? And try to, keep pushing on and keep pressing on. And I think that kind of style of design, I think is a lot better than like the traditional dungeons that I drew as a kid, where you're just like, here's a room, and then there's a T section, and here's another room, and here's a T section, here's another room, and and you're just like, okay, so all of these things are just like literally 10 or 20 feet away from each other. And what I'm saying is we need to think of this as terms of like, shrinking them down. Now, Pathfinder 2 expects you to be full health for fights. The designers have always been kind of cagey about that. I've heard players like me, and talking heads say that a lot more than I've heard Paizo people saying it. But that being said, I think that the idea is, number one, a lot of people, myself included, think that something like a moderate fight is already kind of a joke in Pathfinder 2. That by itself, if you're going to fight a moderate fight and you're going to be at full hit points beforehand and you're going to get to full hit points afterhand, I don't even know if that's worth your time or your challenge. There are some people who play on our server who would say the same thing for a severe encounter. They would say, it's not even worth my time or challenge, right? What I'm suggesting is that if you are in a situation where you have to fight a moderate, and then maybe there's a chance for a low random encounter before another moderate, that maybe this way you can challenge the game by, because I don't know what the number is, But I'm going to assume that if you're fighting a moderate encounter and you're even remotely skilled at the game, that you're like 99% chance to be okay. Like you make it out, fine, nobody got hurt, right? Nobody's dead, nobody's, whatever. So if you then heal to full, then you have a 99% chance of success on the next one. But if you link them together, then the first one, sure, you have a 99% chance. But then when you go into the second fight, maybe it's 95%. And then after that low random encounter, maybe it's 90%. And then maybe this final moderate encounter is only an 80% chance that you're going to make it through without any sort of problems or casualties. Now, 80%, you might be like, those are great odds. Let me tell you something. In a modern day D20-based MMO, having a 20% chance of having any sort of real or significant consequence from a combat encounter is monstrously high. So, yeah. I mean, maybe that's the way to go. I'd also say that, if the players come up with a way or a solution, is now clearly the balance of the game is designed around the players being at full hit point. But because we don't care about the balance, right? Then it's not as critical that we get it exactly right. So yeah, Sifter may have confirmed that the party was expected to be at full health before every combat. But for what, Paul? So that a moderate encounter fight is not difficult at all? Well, in that case, awesome. But, I think that if we figure out a way to chain these encounters together and sort of think of the region as being the encounter area, then I think we can get a little bit more of a procedure for that. Vault of Larankar is amazing, as is Hall of the Rainbow Mage and the Tomb of Abithzor. All excellent adventures, Dr. Waits. The time. Right, I agree with Darth Gorlock. PF2 balance is based on full health. But that only matters, balance only matters when you're putting the players into a situation where they have no choice. Okay? Like if I tell the GM, if I write in an adventure, the players have to go and they have to stop this lady from completing her ritual, or she is going to destroy, what was the name of that stupid town? All I can think of is Sandpoint. What's the first adventure? The one that they published, the one that's really, the one with the blood ooze, the evil alchemist at the end of it. Why can't I think of the name of that stupid adventure? Oh, Plaguestone. Got it. Okay. So Fall of Plaguestone, right? Fall of Plaguestone says you have to fight this monster, and then this monster, and then this monster, and then this monster, and then beat the boss. Otherwise, the town gets destroyed. My group of players, when they first fought that adventure, they got to the point where the alchemical familiar of the alchemist alerts her that the adventurers are coming, and she sets off the little alchemical creature to go set off the bomb. And they went, we're going to go take a long rest. And I was like, okay, the town blows up. And they were like, good, fuck those people. They sucked. We didn't like them anyways. But my point is, a lot of people would have had a problem with that. They'd have been like, why did you destroy the town? That's not fair. And if that's going to be how your players are going to react, then you have to give them a system where they can essentially not be challenged. And if you create them a system where they're incapable of fighting those encounters, and that's going to punish them in the story, and they don't want to be punished in the story, then you have to create a system where they can just heal to full after every fight. We're not doing that with a Megadungeon. There's no reason that the party has to keep fighting. If they fight one goblin encounter and they're, like, we don't have time to short rest, more goblins are coming, and then someone goes, well, that's not fair. We have to, oh wait, no, we don't have to fight these goblins. We could back out. We could leave. And it's like, yeah, you could. You don't have to stay here. You could retreat back to where you came from before. You're only staying here because you want to keep pressing the counter. Now, if you go back to town and you heal up and rest up, when you come back, maybe the fight is back. Maybe the fight is maybe the goblins have reinforced. Maybe there's a new problem to deal with. There's no free lunch. But like if you can't do that when, you know, the time is on the clock and the alchemist is going to destroy the town. You have to create a system that will allow the players to, you know, charge in and save the day, you know. Kendall says, my players are terrible at PF2E, and I basically only throw severe plus encounters at them. And that's kind of where a lot of people end up with. And you know what? Derek is completely right, too. Those difficulties are all made up anyways. You know, if your party sucks, you know, like the group's like, oh, this is only a moderate encounter. You're like, yeah, it almost wiped my group. Yeah, because your group is going to be different than, you know, every other group that's out there. I'm 5 sessions into KM. Which one's KM? KM. Is that the new one? KM. And I accidentally threw a severe encounter at them. I was worried. Kingmaker. Okay, great. And I accidentally threw a severe encounter at them, but I was worried, but they beat it with almost no injuries. Exactly. PF2 players are sure that PF2 designers are messiahs of games sent by the gods of board games. In fact, they are a little worse than those of D&D. I don't think they're worse. I just think the PF2 designers were trying to create a game system that could let people play adventure paths the way that people wanted to play adventure paths. And the way that people wanted to play adventure paths was the complete opposite of what we were talking about tonight, right? The idea of characters going into a dangerous place, being excited to explore it, right? Full of interesting treasures and hints and rumors, wanting to explore, not feeling like, see, the point of a dungeon, Megadungeon, is that the Megadungeon is the destination, right? When you're playing an adventure path, the dungeon is just a barrier. It's a hurdle. It's a challenge that you're trying to overcome so that you can get to, quote unquote, the good part. If that's how you feel, then you shouldn't make a Megadungeon because your players are not going to want to engage with it. But if your players like the progress of interacting with an environment and being rewarded for it and getting to pick and choose their battles, you know, I've used this example before, but when we were playing a Megadungeon in Pathfinder 1, the group, they were like level 8 or something, level 8 or 9. And one night, only 2 players showed up. So if you're playing an adventure path and you have a bunch of level 8 and 9 encounters, and you design them or you bought the adventure and it's made for 4 or 5 players and only 2 of your party members showed up, what do? Do you cancel? Do you have to fudge everything on the fly? Do you have to recreate all the monster stats? Now you have to play the other PC? Like, what do you do? You know what they did? I was like, okay, we're playing. There's 2 of you. And they were like, well, obviously we're level 8. We can't go to level 8 or 9. There's only 2 of us. We'll get stomped. And they're like, we barely touched level 5. We're level 8. Let's just the 2 of us go back to level 5 without the rest of the party. Screw them. And they did. And it was awesome. It was one of the best sessions of the entire campaign. Okay? It was just the wizard and the rogue, the diviner and the rogue. And that's it. The whole session. But, the rogue might as well have been a frontline fighter on level 5. Hell, the wizard could kind of almost melee on level 5. And it was kind of awesome. It was for me, it was one of my favorite sessions. And I know for Smith, it was one of his favorite sessions. And he's brought that up a lot on this channel, actually, I think before. So Lance Quagmire was the wizard on that level and, cast an ice storm with the Sonic descriptor. And we talked about how like it was just shockwaves that just blew everybody's bodies apart. And that when the survivors came into the room to find out what had happened, all they saw was just the bodies of their companions splattered away. Level 5 was the domain of like a snake people cult or something like that. When I ran Plaguestone for a group with Kalana, I think they all hated those townsfolk too. Yeah, my group hated the townsfolk people of Plaguestone real bad. Let's see. Darth Gorlock says there is a forum post on the PF2E section of our Discord for anyone interested, linking to a Reddit post that goes into how to measure effective difficulty for multiple encounters without healing. And that's great, but I would argue that to a certain extent, once you get to this point in the game, or once you get to this point in a Megadungeon, like I think you have a responsibility to understand relative balance, right? I'm not going to throw a lesser death on level 1 or level 2, right? Because that's just not even in the same ballpark. But if I populate level 2 with a bunch of monsters that are level 2, level 3, level 1, whatever. And your group goes in and I'm like, oh yeah, like I'm expecting them to fight several of these encounters in a row. And maybe you get your ass beat. Okay. Then it doesn't matter what the encounter math says. You guys are going to be like, damn, we got our shit kicked. We're going to go back, and try to rest up or something because this was terrible. On the other hand, maybe your group rolls nothing but crits. They just crush through the encounter. And it wasn't even an encounter. So then how do you judge the difficulty of the next encounter? You can't. Now that kind of scientific breakdown is only important if you're doing an adventure where the players have to fight those fights. The beauty of a mega dungeon is that the players are in no pressure. I mean, there's consequences. The monsters might change their tactics. Other factions might change. All these things can change. But, the players aren't being like with a gun to their head. You have to keep going. Otherwise, something disastrous will happen. No. And in fact, if you're using the carrot method, as I am, they're bummed because they have to go back to town and they have to heal up because that encounter kicked their butt. And they were really looking forward to getting a bunch of bonus experience points. On the other hand, when the players are doing great and they're getting a ton of bonus experience points, they're going to keep pushing on because they're like, oh my God, we're getting so much bonus experience points now. This is great. And you're like, yeah, but if they're getting a bunch of bonus experience points, isn't that going to ruin the game? Aren't the challenges going to become really easy? Yes, they will. And the players will know that the reason the challenges are easy now is because they fought the hard fights before. Or they're going to go, we're going to skip level 2 and we're going to go straight down to level 4 because we got so much bonus experience points because we played like rock stars, because we played like hardcore motherfuckers. Aiden, got to go. First time listening on your stream and you had a lot of great insight that I'll be incorporating in my next game. Awesome. Thanks, Aiden, for stopping by. Appreciate you. I think Mega Dungeons are just better with older systems. Princes of the Apocalypse worked well in 5e for my group, but that book was a mess and more story-driven. I haven't loved a lot of the 5e adventures. And it actually sounded funny. Some of the 5e adventures that I thought were okay were ones that people said, oh, these things are terrible because they're like, there's no plot and it's just a bunch of locations. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good to me. The stories that happen in a Mega Dungeon are just, what happened in this week's shenanigans. Once as a GM, once you realize there's no plot that the party is going to fuck up, once you realize that there's no cheating that they're going to occur, the worst case scenario is they, completely destroy your game and they somehow figure out a way to kill the big dragon on level 20 and they kill it after 7 sessions. Okay, great. Your campaign, they won. Congratulations. You won. That's awesome. To me, that's a win. Now I should point out too that there's no plot. There's only challenges. That's the beauty of it. Right. So maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. I do not think you can run stories in a Mega Dungeon, but that's not the standard take. It's my take. I don't think you can run stories in a Mega Dungeon. I think stories can occur. I think narratives can emerge, but they are all naturally emergent, right? It's from the interactions of the party with the other stuff. And, we didn't get into it because, time ran out, but I'm going to say this real quick. Mega Dungeons in any edition of any game. Hell, I might even argue no, because if you're playing a very strict, straight, railroaded adventure that has to go a certain way, this is not going to help you. But if you're playing a Mega Dungeon, I have 2 words for you. Okay. Reaction roll. It is so fun to roll randomly and determine how monsters react to your party. It's fun for the GM. It's fun for the party. It makes the dungeon feel more varied, and it makes the event dungeon feel more alive. It makes the dungeon not feel just like a meat grinder of adventures. When I look at recently, my 5e group played through the 5e version of Into the Borderlands, Keep on the Borderlands. Goodman Gaines released this hefty tome of from their adventures, classic homage to the Keep on the Borderlands. And, my group came in, and I'm trying to remember here exactly. They fought the goblins, but then they I don't even remember, something involving the orcs, and they killed the orcs. And then they were like, because you killed the orc chieftain, his wives are now your wife. And so the orc wives became the players' wives. and they were very upset about that. And the orcs were like, you're our chieftain now. And then like the players befriended this other orc, and they like gave him the wives, so he became the chieftain, and he was like eternally thankful to them for giving him the orc wives. And so he like was like, I'm your man for life. And then the orc tribe ended up being like their allies. Or also famous in that story, when they were fighting the goblins, they came across the giant lair, and they had drunk all the goblins. The two dwarves in the party had drunk all the goblins' goblin wine or whatever, and they came into the ogre lair. The ogre, I rolled randomly. The ogre was not home, and so they started stripping the ogre's lair for treasure, and they went through a secret door to get to it. And then the dwarves in the party, both their characters and their players were kind of drunk, decided to pee all over the ogre's bed because they thought it'd be funny. So they left. And so then when they went back to their camp, I rolled randomly, and I just said, and just in my head, I was like, I'm going to say there's like a 50% chance that the ogre comes back and, he's figured out what happened. And I rolled low, and I was like, you know what? The ogre thinks the goblins killed it because he smells the goblin wine. So he thinks the goblins got drunk and came into his lair and peed all over it and stole his stuff. So when the party came back, they discovered that the goblin lair was a charnel house, and that there were dead goblin bodies splattered all over the halls because the ogre had gone on a killer rampage. So as they're making their way in there, they finally get to the chieftain's room, and he's dead. He's like, thrown through a wall, his head's smashed. And the ogre's sitting there on the edge of the chieftain's bed, but he's really messed up because the ogre has taken a bunch of arrows and hits from all the little goblins. And so I rolled randomly, and I was like, yeah, the ogre only has like 1 hit die left. So I rolled it, and he had like 3 hit points. So the party came in, and it was kind of like this moment where they like saw the ogre, and they were like, oh shit, it's the ogre. But they realized how messed up it was, and they just like pulled out their bow, shot it, hit, and it killed him because he was so low on hit points because they had peed on the bed, which made the ogre go fight the goblins, which had killed all the goblins and also killed the ogre. Now, sure, they lost the experience points for killing the goblins and stuff, but all the treasure was there, so they just loot, and I was using treasure for XP, so they were just like scooping all this up, and so they were like, this was the best plan ever. By peeing on the ogre's bed, we pissed him off, got him to take out the goblins, which also weakened him. Now he's dead, so now we get all his treasure, and they were like, this is the best thing we've ever done. Now, would that make for a great movie? No. But was it fun for the players that were involved? Yes, it showed that their actions had consequences. And in this case, the consequences worked out really well in their favor. But you could also imagine a situation where I rolled high and the ogre said, these adventures, this wasn't the goblins, this was the adventures. I'm going to go to the goblins and be like, we need to team up. And then when they returned, the ogre was waiting for them, and I maybe killed half the party. You don't know. We don't know. That's what makes it fun. We don't know. So, Megadungeons are an example of the GM setting up a situation, not a plot, right? You're setting up a powder keg. You're setting up a reaction, but you don't know how it's going to play out. In fact, you don't want to know how it's going to play out, right? You want it to go in some crazy direction that you never expected, because that's what you're here for. That's why you bring the players into your game, so that you can set up this situation and watch them fuck it up. That's what I want to see, So yeah, I mean, right. That's a OSR refrain, right? Prepare situations, not plots. PBTA says the same stuff. And so yeah, I go, there's an ogre, and he's in a tentative truce with the goblin tribe that lives next door. That's my situation. I don't have any other stake in it other than that. And a lot of people might say, so Derek, let me get this right. The parties pee on the bed, and now they kill all the goblins. The goblins all get killed, and they get to kill the ogre for free. Man, my players would be pissed. My players weren't. If your players would be pissed that they didn't get to have a series of challenging encounters against the goblins, and that the ogre wasn't a drawn-out, long slugfest 5-6 round combat of epic proportions, and it would have looked really good in an MCU movie, then don't do this. Go play the games the way that, go play Pathfinder 2 the way it was designed, and you will be very pleasantly surprised, and it will work very well. I'm saying that I think you can take these modern games, and now you might say, well, Derek, why wouldn't you just use Old School Essentials? Why wouldn't you just go use Labyrinth Lore? Why wouldn't you just go use Shadow Dark? I'll tell you why. Those games are boring. Sorry, they are. They're boring. I mean, they're fun, I guess, but there's like nothing to them. There's no crunch. There's no pieces to Jenga. Your character's like 3 lines on a piece of paper. It's boring. You know, I don't know what to tell you. It's not a power fantasy. You know, like I said before, for me, D&D adventures are at their best when you're challenging the players and the PCs. In my experience, old school games are really just challenging the players because the PCs, there's nothing there. There's nothing to it. Now, you know what I said? I don't like builds. When I say I don't like builds, it doesn't mean I don't like powers. It means I do like feats. I do like powers. I just don't like planning at level 1 what feat I'm going to take at level 18, right? I don't like having this, you know, structured character that comes online at level 12. Before that kind of sucks. I don't like that idea. But the fact of the matter is, you know, I've tried playing old school games, and most of the old school games I've played have been at like conventions, and they're 1 shots or 2 or 3 shots. But the idea of sitting down to play a Shadow Dark campaign or an old school Essentials campaign and playing it for 6 months or 12 months feels very boring to me, because I like having those growth of those powers, and I like that's part of the fun of D&D. Remember how I said as you go deeper into the dungeon, it becomes less realistic, it becomes more magical, it becomes stranger and weirder. I want that to apply to my party as well, and I want them to have cool, weird, fun abilities and weird, powerful magical items, and I want them to be able to do cool stuff. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean all combat powers, which is what a lot of these you know, D&D games entail. But overall, you know, I think, you know, yeah, and there's no reason you can't have epic battles in this player-driven style play. The players just have to want it. Usually they want to roll a powder keg down the stairs and delete the fight. And you know what, Tundalis? You're absolutely right. And the beautiful thing about it is the players get to pick, you know. There's this, this is like a really deep cut. All right. From the first season of Heroes, you know, that really cool show that got shit on by the writer's strike and then it was terrible. In the first season, or maybe it was the second season, but in the first season of Heroes, there's a scene where future Peter Petrelli and future Hiro Nakamura are trying to do something. And they enter into a room and there's a bunch of people, and they for some odd reason, Hiro has his sword. This is like future Hiro with his goatee, and future Peter who has all his powers unlocked. And the guards are charging them, and they go, should we freeze time? And they kind of go, I haven't had a good fight in years. And even though they could totally freeze time and just walk past these guards, they decide to fight them anyways, just because, you know, they're I haven't had a good fight in years. Right. And I'm not even kidding you when I say this. Sometimes, there's a famous example of when the party was leaving and they had almost killed / betrayed / ruined the lives of this group of doppelgangers. And the doppelgangers were laying in wait, and they ambushed the party, and they thought it was going to be like this TPK. And the party's wizard, who's in the chat, just said, fuck this. And he pulled out his scroll of Cloud Kill that people forgot he had. And he just cast Cloud Kill, and it just rolled down the stairs, and it literally just wiped out all the doppelgangers, in just one shot. It was just there was not even there were barely rolls made. In fact, their hit dice might have been so low that at that point for 3rd edition or Pathfinder 1, they don't even get to make a save. They're just dead. But there are also times where the party was yeah, we could totally probably just one-shot these guys with a spell, but you know what? Let's just fight them just cuz, you know? It'd be fun, you know? Oh, cool. It's a room full of earth elementals. It's a room full of giants. Let's fight them. I want to have fun, you know? There was another time they were in this room and we had a bunch of animated statues and a bunch of animated torture devices that came to life and were attacking them. And the party bust out this awesome thing. They cast wall of stone as a hemisphere, and then they use stone shape to make arrow slits, and the ranger didn't have any sort of penalty to shoot through the rain. And I was just you know what, you guys, they're all dead. They can't. They're inanimate, or they're animated, non-intelligent animated chains and Iron Maidens and racks. You guys are in this you know, defensive bunker that you've just pulled out in the middle of the room with arrow slits and bulwarks. We don't need to roll all these dice. You guys just destroy them and it's totally fine. So, you know, there's a give and a take. Sometimes the party wants to roll the powder keg down the stairs, and sometimes they want to fight just because they want to fight, you know? So Boothby says, our group hated Plaguestone because the town was known for turnips. The GM made a turnip casserole for us the first session. It was edible. I don't know if you saw up ahead, but or way up ahead, but Lance Quagmire, because he was in my party. He was one of my players in that campaign. He was like turnips, but the turnips. He was saying that earlier up above. Oh, that's funny. Exactly. Hex crawls work the same way. And I'd also point out that a lot of these things do apply to hex crawls too. If you just tell the party, here's a blank sheet of paper, go explore the hexes, that's going to be very boring. You need to give players context. They need to have ideas about where they want to go and how do I get there, right? You need to present it as a puzzle, you know? And yes, so I completely agree. Megadungeons are an extension of hex crawls, or hex crawls are an extension of Megadungeons, if you want to be that way. Let's see. Jonas would watch that ridiculous description of a thing on film if he was being honest. What's the worst game you can think of to run a dungeon crawl? I don't know, Fiasco. If you mean like D20 dungeon games, Chubos would be pretty bad. Great Denny says, God, it was so good until the strike. It was such a good show. And I've never seen a show just like have so much premise. And that maybe Game of Thrones is the only thing I could think of that like just dropped off a cliff so quickly. Hell yeah. I remember when the phasing dude puts his hand through. I remember that show really well. I remember the characters' names. Like, it was awesome. I didn't really watch the 3rd season or something, but yeah. You wanted to make a Jello and the players had to eat it when they had to deal damage. That's excellent. So yeah, it's an art form to run a good dungeon, and we could do a bunch more stuff about how to make dungeons and how to make them interesting. And there's good stuff out there about how to make dungeons, and Jaquays it, and introduce loops and cyclical dungeon creation and all those stuff. We've done streams on those things. But I think the thing that you have to understand about a mega dungeon is a lot of times people have problems with them is because they're approaching them with the wrong idea, the wrong mindset, which is it's not about telling a story. You have to get that. It's not about you as the DM having a responsibility to make the game fun, right? To make the game interesting, because the game is whatever the players make of it. It's just a sandbox that is controlled, right? In fact, the distinction would be, it's like your kid, here's the sandbox. The sandbox is defined. It's just this box in your backyard where you go play in. When a lot of people talk about like sandboxes, they're actually talking about like the beach. And that's a lot harder to keep control of your kid, because now they can literally go anywhere. And you go, I wasn't prepared for that. But when it's a constrained sandbox, you say, look, you can go anywhere as long as it's in the dungeon, right? And as long as you're doing the thing in the dungeon. I find that to be just completely an incredible experience, and just letting the players learn your dungeon, and it can reflect you. Also, there's so much more to get into this, but this is something I really want to bring out. Megadungeons let you use the entire buffalo. If you look through a D&D adventure, a monster manual on treasure, so many things, so many monsters, so many treasure items are just made for, or don't even make sense unless they're like in a dungeon. And it is so easy. You pick a theme for your level, you pick some regions, you find monsters on that level that fit that theme, and then you put them all in there. And, as things go deeper, it gets weirder, it gets crazier. In the Mega Dungeon that we played in Pathfinder 1, it was dungeon, and then you get to level 9. And level 9 was the Garden of Shadows. That's right. It was a massive tropical jungle in the middle of the dungeon. Okay. Level 6 had a portal that went to a mythical Isle of Dread type island, complete with dinosaurs and a volcano. It was weird, right? I've talked about this before. Level 4, the Prison of a Red Saint, was inside of a tesseract that was expressed as a 8-dimensional space on a cube. Sure. Now, level 1 was just a dungeon, right? Level 2 was a series of canals flowing through the dungeon that led to a magical fountain. Level 3 was sort of an underwater or underground cave system with a river flowing through it. But as you got lower and lower and lower, the dungeon design got weirder and crazier and stranger. And, level 11 was the Petrified Congregation, which was about of like religious Medusa and their cult that worshiped this goddess of earth that they were trying to undiscover. Level 14 was literally a city in a bottle. That was like level 14 was a level within level 13, which itself was fine, but then the party would shrink down and enter this city in a bottle. So like it was just very strange, right? Level 8 or 7 was actually the ruins that they originally entered was like the ruins of some keep or castle, but now they were just ruins. But like level 8 was like you going back in time to like a ghost version of that original keep that was on top. Anyways, point is you can just get really strange with it and you can get really crazy with it. And it's not about trying to make it make sense. And it's not about trying to create this compelling storyline arc. It's not about exploring or detailing a character's growth. It's just about having fun playing D&D. It's just about having fun experiences with your friends and engaging with the mechanics and, coming up with stupid plans or great plans and watching them work and then rolling dice and cheering when someone gets a 20 and like going, oh no, when someone rolls an at 1 and gets killed, And so, Dr. Waits, I tend to agree with you. I think that OSR has gotten way too caught up on the grim dark, on the gritty realism, right? On the everything is just dirty and has, gunk under its fingernails and everything is just, gritty. And again, like I said, original first edition AD&D was things like, Whelm and Razor Whelm and Black Razor and Wave. And it was Expedition to keep on the board, it was Expedition to the Barrier Peaks and crashed UFOs and all this other stuff, Now, don't get me wrong. I like goblins and undead too. I mean, if you remember, I did my favorite monsters. And I said, basically, giants, humanoids, and undead are like my favorite monsters in the entire game. But you can include other stuff, especially when you make it thematic and you make it fun. You know what? Have a level, call it, the Dark Glade. And when the group gets down there, they find this dungeon level. It's got a lot of big rooms, but it's filled with these overgrown, poisonous death plants. And you just put all the fae that you have in the book for that wide range or level, but they're all dark fae and they're twisted by the evil. Because at the heart of this dungeon level, there's like a glowing, corrupted crystal that was planted there by somebody from lower on. And it actually is part of a clue that you tie together to create like a story, one of those onion layers. And maybe if the group takes out the dark heart, maybe the fae go back to being good, or maybe they grant the party a wish or something like that and they leave. But right now you get to go hack through dryads and kill nymphs and kick treants down holes, because you never get to use those monsters, right? I'm saying dungeons give you the chance to use the whole buffalo, right? And that's what's really, really fun. Right. And so, now, Gardens of Yin or Stygian Library, I think can be a little too whimsical. Again, I said before, realism and fun. Just figure out the middle spot. Now, for you, that could be more over towards realism. Or for you, it could be more over towards fun. You need to find the right balance for your group. I'm just saying, I think that somewhere between realism and fun is where you should place your dungeon. And I definitely think that as you get further and deeper, you can get a little bit weirder and crazier with it. But I don't, that description right there, killing a character with an animated cake, that's where I start to kind of lose. That for me is too whimsical. That's too fun for me, for my tastes, right? So that's just me. But for you, that could be great. Yes, and Darth, when we talked about the importance of creating themes and making sure that players can respect that and feel that theme, because I do think that is really, really awesome. Because it makes it easier to design your encounters. And to be clear, like 4th edition D&D is great for this because you have all these monsters that are all kind of thematically tied together and you can just use a bunch of them and just drop them all in and it all works together. So 4th edition D&D does have that as a really nice advantage. Although I will point out that if you're playing 3rd edition D&D, Monster Manual 5 kind of did a similar thing because it was like a precursor to what they did in 4th edition as sort of that part of that end of life 3rd edition that was really kind of a beta test or an alpha test for 4th edition. But yeah, I mean, the immovable rod is like the quintessential dungeoneering item that, you know, if you're playing some really high concept campaign that's about political aspirations or character growth moments, you go, why does this item exist? You know? And if you're just doing endless combats, why does this item exist? Right? Yeah, if level 1 is the same as level 4, which is the same as Goblin Town, it sucks. You need to have these different experiences for sure. It also grounds people and it lets people understand where they are inside of the space of the dungeon. And yeah, if you're high fantasy, make it have cool fantasy shit. That's why we play this game. I always say that before. Make your fantasy game fantastical. You know, I think that stuff is really, really cool. And I'm a big fan of it. You know, and I have some problems with DCC. And I think that one of my problems with DCC is that weird fantasy. It's that grim fantasy, that weird fantasy. That for me is not my aesthetic. My aesthetic is like D&D fantasy, whatever that means. For sure. Yeah, Shadow Dark more. I mean, Smith from our channel made this famous random encounter, which is like, it was like new $1 million Kickstarter generator. And it was just like a bunch of different words that like on one side that were like, grim, dark, umbral descent, League of Shadows. It was all just like, just like making something sound dark and grim and like that. Oh, if you put those two random names together, you've got yourself a $1 million Kickstarter. Yeah. Again, I think for me, there's a limit to how much whimsy I want before it just becomes silly and a little cringe, but it's going to vary from group to group and from person to person, for sure. The Last Unicorn. Was that a Rankin and Bass? Was Last Unicorn Rankin and Bass? Last Unicorn. Yep, it certainly was. 1982, the year I was born. If we don't have grim or dark or weird or silly, what is D&D fantasy? Let me think. D&D fantasy to me is rope of climbing. I don't think that's particularly weird or grim or dark. Maybe it's a little silly, but not like in like a completely silly way. So to me, like the rope of climbing is kind of like a quintessential D&D tone that I like in the game. Bottle of air, immovable rod. I think that to me is the tone that I like to set with a game. So it's a weird way to express the tone, but I don't view those things as being, thing. What about rope trick? I've used rope trick many times in my life. Rope trick is probably okay. Rope trick is getting close to being a little too silly in some ways. But it's really just an extension of the extra dimensional space of the haversack, but or the bag of holding, but yeah, I mean, I think rope trick is still within that acceptable range. I'm trying to think of one that wouldn't be. No. Yeah, no, it's hard for me to think of a spell or a magic item that just stands out as me being like, like Carpet of Flying is a little stupid, but like one of our favorite characters of all time was this ranger that our buddy played who had a Carpet of Flying. And the reason we liked it is because it was so dumb and it was so stupid. And like we made it like fully like, to be like a fully Oriental rug. Like it wasn't even remotely fantasy. It was just like literally like an Oriental rug and he flew around on it. But yeah, I mean, those are the kind of, yes, the intestine spell gut ropes, is definitely not my brand of fantasy. Or the one that makes you, the ones that make you, the person grows clown shoes and, what about Bag of Tricks? So I'm not a huge fan of the Bag of Tricks, actually. In fact, one of the problems I have with a lot of these OSR games is they have these lists of magical items, and they seem more stupid and dumb than they do like useful or practical. Like, I want items that like it's almost like there's like a weird pride in being like, look at how dumb and stupid this item is. Can you figure out how to use it? Like, I like items that are going to be useful in, I don't know, exploring the dungeon and dealing with its challenges. Those are the items that I like, you know, rope of climbing, boots of spider walk, boots of spider climbing or whatever, gloves of storing. Just, these items that are they don't necessarily have to be combat, combat, because I don't think that combat should be the default thing that people do. But I like one of my favorite magic items, which again, it's magical. You could argue it's even a little strange or a little weird, but I think it's still okay, is Nolzur's magic pigments. And if you don't know what Nolzur's magic pigments are, it's magical paints that like let you paint things in real life and then it like becomes real. And that to me is like awesome. Like, I think that's weird and magical, but not like in a jar of endless mayonnaise kind of way. I find that to be acceptable. So, those are the kind of experiences and items I like, for sure. But again, that's my opinion. I'm not saying that it's wrong to like the more weirder stuff or the grimmer stuff or the darker stuff. I just think that D&D kind of operates the best in the middle, to a certain extent. But yeah, I see these just, silly items that all the time where it's like, OSR will be like, this item will, I don't know. This magical item will point to the nearest jug of dwarven ale once a day. And it's like, okay, like, that's not exciting. I don't know. I mean, like, it just seems weird and stupid. And honestly, a lot of those items in a lot of those books sometimes to me feel like filler. It feels like they felt like they had to put stuff in and they had to be, I don't know, subvert expectations and be weird and different. And they didn't want to like put nothing in. So they just kind of like, I don't know, just came up with terrible ideas, filled them on. I mean, I'm not calling any one particular person out. There might be some great items out there, but some of the items I've read in some of those books are quite dumb. And I'd be like, I wouldn't even view this as treasure. I would just view this as trash. I think that's the problem. So yeah. So it's 10 o'clock. It's past 10 o'clock. So we're going to call that even. Speaking of dungeons, we had some really nice results for our poll today. I got voted. Thursday, we're either going to do 4th edition, or we're going to do, we might do, I'm having a brain fart. We're doing the game that I own. That's it. Wicked Ones. Wicked Ones is a dungeon-based Forged in the Dark game that kind of failed to kickstart. It's a game that I kickstarted, and then of course it never got released officially. Like, they released everything they did have, and then they said sorry. But it's a dungeon-based Forged in the Dark game, and I think that's kind of interesting, especially since we just looked at Grimwild. But that one's been on the list for a long time. So I think over the next couple weeks, this week we might revisit 4th edition. We're gonna revisit 4th edition. We're gonna revisit Wicked Ones. And at some point we're gonna go back and look at Pathfinder 2 and look at more of the spells. So we got a bunch of stuff to look at, but I think it's gonna be really interesting. That sounds cool. What's the other dungeony Forged in the Dark game again? Iron something. Iron Sworn. That's the solo game. Right. The thing about Wicked Ones is you're the baddies. You're the ones who own the dungeon. Is it not a game version of the musical Wicked? One of my favorite musicals of all time. The new soundtrack for the movie is incredible. Ariana and Cynthia killed it. They just absolutely killed it. Portable Hole is another classic. I agree. 100%. Travis, I bounced off of Shadow of the Demon Lord very hard because of the body horror and because of the gross, gory, over-the-top imagery. It's not something that I really like or do in my D&D games, especially in my like fun fantasy, dungeon games. Because again, to me, D&D, taken at its base, it's not really high fantasy. It's not like shining knights, defending, kingdoms. And it's not like grim, dark Conan the Barbarian, grid of the earth, everything's rusted and dirty, and you're in between. The D&D characters are powerful, but they're also kind of, salt of the earth. So they and this is as presented in the game with the class features and the feats and the abilities. Now, there are games, high level Pathfinder 2 definitely gives your characters kind of these anime-like powers. 4th edition D&D, high level character, especially epic level, definitely gave your character these crazy, weird, over the top dungeon, type powers. So that does, kind of change the math a little bit. I'm not going to deny it that the game does change a bit for some games when you get to high level. I kickstarted Shadow of the Weird Wizard. I think I have it on my shelf somewhere. Yep. And I have not looked at it yet. So that is it. No, not Skate Wizard. Skate Wizard's a different game. Skate Wizard was played on the Knights of the Last Call Discord, so that should tell you everything you need to know. Speaking of dungeons, the group we ran Torchbearer Session 0 for the first group of campaigns, or the first group from our campaign on Sunday, and now we're doing the second group this Saturday. And these are going to be two different groups of patrons who are going to be playing in the same dungeon space, in the same dungeon world. So a lot of this like rival party stuff that we've been talking about, I'm going to try to incorporate into the game. But instead of it being a rival NPC party, it's going to be a rival PC party. I think it'll be really, really interesting. So unfortunately, because I'm running it for patrons, I can't really share with you guys like my process for like designing these dungeons for them, because then they would see them and it would be, not great. But I was pretty happy with the way that everything turned out on Sunday. There was some learning curves and stuff like that. So I was pretty happy with that. Do it as a secret channel and just say, you guys can't watch this. Maybe. I mean, I trust my party, I trust my players and stuff like that, so it's good for that, but, actually, let's see. Go. So, yeah, so this is after the session 0. This is what we ended up with. So for those of you who haven't seen, like, this is the characters track their equipment on the actual battle mat, because Torchbearer doesn't use gridded combat or anything like that. But since it's Roll20, we're just tracking it this way. So these are all the characters' equipment slots and stuff like that. And this is how they're going to track to that way. So, we can see here, this is Erber. Erber, in lieu of wearing any armor or equipment, is just wearing backpacks and a satchel. So he has all of these slots for extra equipment. Because depending on what backpack you wear, or depending on what you wear, that determines how many slots you get. So the clock at the top left is the grind. So in Torchbearer, when whenever the party takes a turn, the grind ticks, and when it reaches 4, everybody gains a new condition, and that's what eventually kills your characters. So this thing here was actually just them shopping. So the way that they shopped, the way that they equipped their character was they went in, and I just had all these items laid out here, and so all they had to do to shop was just drag. If somebody wanted, like here, this is Boothby's character. You can see he has 2 slots left in his backpack, and so he could have taken like some extra rations and just put them in his backpack. But apparently he did not want to, so it's fine there. And you can see everybody's water skins and bottles are filled with wine. Bob's got a grappling hook. This is quiver. So it worked out really well. I was really happy with it, and it was really fun. You may revise your loadout. So I think it'll be a lot of fun, and go from there. Let's see what's here. Time to insinuate myself as a helpful Discord member who asks details about their game and sells the info to the other side. Now that I could really respect. But how do I like Torchbearer? Well, Beyond Fantasy, I haven't played second edition yet. I've played first edition back in the day. I only played it as like one shots and at cons. I've never like played like a full campaign of it, so it'll be really interesting to see how it goes. What about the clock? Oh, sorry, that's Boothby talking. Are these all free assets you grabbed, or did you make them? I made/hacked them. So is how I would describe that. Like my Photoshop is just like, some of these are from like I have like a subscription to Craft Picks, and it has like a bunch of like icon art. And then most of the rest of it just got like photoshopped, so that I could, let's see, so that I could fix it. Where did I get that cool clock? Well, so for the cool clock, I messed around with AI until I got something that looked kind of okay. And then I used Photoshop to, let's see here if I can actually, here we go. So like basically, I started with just this area. This is what the image looked like after I cleaned it up in Photoshop. And then I just grab that quadrant and apply a mask with a soft light filter to kind of make it blend in with the layer, and then delete the background and place a mask on it so that it doesn't have all this black background, because otherwise it would look like that. This is like what I got out of the Midjourney thing. So mask it out and then just apply these different images and add these different color wedges using this layer mask. Then go over to Roll20, wherever that is. There it is, Roll20. And then go over to Roll20, and then all I did in Roll20 was take the make a rollable table. So this case, this is the grind. That was the original one before I added art. Here we go, clock grind. So this is actually a rollable table, but when you make a rollable table in Roll20, you can make it as a token, and it'll make like a new token for you. And then this is just a macro that I wrote that increases the side of a rollable token. So anyways, that's how I did all that. The Grind is the name of one of my favorite coffee shops. Awesome. It was not clear how much stuff I was going to carry for it. Redacted info. Okay, that's fair enough. And we do have to put those in. But have I played Tormenta 20, a D20 mana-based game that got the best game of the year in Brazil? I have not. That sounds pretty cool. All right, maybe I'll take a look at it. So I'm hoping that this will give my players a really cool experience. This is actually what I'm working on right now. So on a character sheet, what was this, Tane? So on this character sheet here, you can see that the characters have these conditions, and they track these on their character sheet. So like you can be angry or you can be afraid. And I want the players to obviously track this on their character sheet, but I want the other people to be able to see what conditions your character has. This is my hungry and thirsty token. It's just a piece of armor because I couldn't find a good hungry and thirsty icon while I was making this stuff. But like if Tane was angry and hungry and thirsty, he would check mark these 2 boxes, but then the other players would see these grow up. Now, I'm not going to stick with these icons because I just kind of grabbed these here just to test it, but this is actually what I want to work on before this Saturday is get it so that they can track this things here. My goal here is not to create a video game, and it's definitely not to automate anything. Most of this stuff is still very manual. What I want is Torchbearer is very much a team player game. It's a dungeon game, but it's about doing things as a team. And I really want the party to, be able to, see what other people are doing and understand, like how many torches they have left, how much water or wine do they have left, how much food do they have left, is their armor damaged, is there, what do they have left, what conditions do they have? And rather than being like, one of the things that bothers me about VTTs is it's hard to sometimes get those side conversations and just to like quickly like lean over to the player next to you and say like, how many rations you have left? And you're not like disrupting the game. So this kind of keeps me, in the moment. A good old turkey leg and flask. Well, no, I want to represent that you're hungry, so I would want like hungry and thirsty. So I was thinking like some sort of like empty plate or like, empty flask or something like that. Or maybe like a person like, looking like they're hungry or something like that. These I actually just took from, these just from the Pathfinder 2 icons from the PF2, directory from Foundry. But anyways, so I think it'll be pretty fun. The patrons will definitely get a chance to watch these games. I don't know if we're going to make them publicly available yet. Not every patron may be comfortable with that, but they're definitely comfortable with sharing it with fellow patrons. So it'll be fun. It'll be cool. And I'm looking forward to playing some other games and all this other stuff. Do you have the Better 20 extension? Don't know it, don't hurt it. Yeah, I'm a Foundry guy. I only used Roll20 because that's where the official character sheet is, and they didn't have a Torchbearer 2nd edition module for Foundry. I'm actually paying somebody. To build me a what's the word I'm looking for? I'm actually paying somebody to build me a Foundry module for Roll20. I'm paying someone to build me a Foundry module for Torchbearer 2nd edition, but it's not where I want it to be yet in terms of full option availability, so I haven't done that. Can you make the icons blink? Well, actually, now that you mention it, if we go back, so I made this icon. So this is the torch packed, in your pack torch, candle. This is the candle in your backpack, and then this is the lit torch icon. And I just made a simple 7-frame animated GIF that I'm just basically changing the brightness and a lens flare effect on the layer. And so I'm going to do that for the torch, for the candle. So I could totally do that for these icons. And I could, especially as you get to like, the bad ones, right? Like, cause you have 7 icons and you get fresh, which is the only good one, you're refreshed. And then there's hungry and thirsty, angry, afraid, exhausted, injured, sick. And then I was going to make one for dead. But I don't know if you necessarily need one for dead, but when you get to these two, they're injured and sick are the bad ones. Those are the ones that can really mess you up. So yeah, it'll be fun. It's mostly just that because I don't have to do anything else with the system and it's not like super automated, like I'm just having fun graphically and I want to make it an easy experience. I understand that some people, one of the problems that people have with this game is that tracking inventory is a pain in the butt when you're doing it on your character sheet because the way that it looks on your character sheet is just, it's like a form fillable PDF. It's just text, you just fill in what you have and just, type it in. But like here, if you want to give somebody, your hammer, you just drag the hammer, from your pouch into their pouch. If you use up an iron stake, you just click this little macro and your iron stakes go down, right? If you, you know, if you want to, oh, I ate a ration. Okay, well then, boop, you know, it just goes down. And then eventually, bloop, it goes to 0 and gets grayed out. And you know, it's not actually there anymore. You can't use that ration. So it's the whole idea of this is, you know, to be very graphical. You know, like, oh no, my helmet, right? My helmet got damaged. Cool. Boom. You know, everybody can see that, you know, and your helmet's damaged. You know, your helmet's damaged. Now, this doesn't track anything automatically. The helmet doesn't get applied anyways automatically. There's no automation in this. So it's really just a graphical representation, but it's just so that we all understand, you know, what's going on in the game. And it's easier for me to understand what's going on in the game. And I think if I can eliminate some of those pain points of people interacting with the icons and interacting with the inventory, that people will enjoy it more if I remove that burden of having everybody have to, like, you know, be tracking everything on a piece of paper. So this is one of those instances where I'm basically trying to say, look, if we were playing at my house, you would have a character sheet, you know, and you'd be playing it by writing stuff down and erasing stuff from your character sheet. And I would probably be like, no, I want to use little cards that come with the deluxe version of the game that actually have these items. And I'd be handing out the cards to people, and I'd want you to put the cards in front of you. And I'd want to print out like a paper doll where you can place the cards in different slots, because I think that'll make it more fun and interactable. So this is one of those situations where I'm not doing this to be complicated. I'm actually doing this to try to make it simpler. So, all right. You also think Cephalopod also thinks a red pulse would be cool. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks for talking dungeons with me. Thank you for talking a little bit of Torchbearer there with me. And I want to say thank you to everybody who hung out tonight. Thanks you to Shadram, Darth, Gorlock, and GM Scott for the tips. They're very appreciated, gentlemen. Thank you so very much. And thank you to everybody else who hung out with us tonight and you know, shared their thoughts and gave us their takeaways. Again, remember, we'll be here. Thank you, Tundalus, thank you for the first 2 hours. For the first 2 hours I missed. Well, Tundalus, you always have the VOD to go back to. And remember, you know, if you like this conversation, you want to be parts of it, you can always join our Patreon, join our exclusive Discord. And of course, we'll be back Thursday. We'll be talking Thursday, maybe Sunday, maybe next Tuesday. Well, next Tuesday, we'll be talking more 4th edition D&D. We'll be talking more Forge in the Dark. We're going to be talking about Wicked Ones, more Pathfinder 2. So a lot of stuff coming, and I'm looking forward to it. But thank you, Tundalus, for that final super chat. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out, and we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace.